There are moments in life when a single gesture can unravel everything you thought you knew. When silence speaks louder than words. When the smallest act of courage becomes a declaration of war. This is the story of Elara, a 20-year-old Omega who should have stayed invisible, who should have kept her head down, who should have survived by being nothing. But in one breath-stealing moment, she made a choice that would shatter a kingdom. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome to a place where love, danger, and destiny collide in the most unexpected ways. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Are you team read in bed at midnight or team listen while you work? I want to know. Elara learned to disappear long before she understood why it mattered. At 20 years old, she had perfected the art of being unseen. She moved through the Black Claw Pack territory like a shadow, head lowered, shoulders curved inward, footsteps soft against stone floors. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then, her voice rarely rose above a whisper. It wasn't shyness. It was survival. In the Black Claw Pack, Omegas existed at the bottom of a hierarchy so rigid it might as well have been carved in iron. They served. They obeyed. They endured. And if they were smart, they never, ever drew attention to themselves. Especially not from him. Alpha King Ronan Blackclaw. Even his name tasted like ash and iron on the tongue. He ruled the largest werewolf territory in the northern continent with a fist so unyielding that neighboring packs whispered his title like a curse. Cold. Ruthless. Merciless. He had no mate, no known weakness, and absolutely no tolerance for defiance. Elara had seen him only twice in her life, both times from a distance so great she could barely make out his features. But she didn't need to see him up close to know what he was. Dangerous. Untouchable. Deadly. The other Omegas in the pack house whispered about him late at night when the betas and enforcers were asleep. They spoke of Omegas who had displeased him, who had made mistakes, who had dared to meet his eyes. None of those Omegas were seen again. So Elara kept her head down. She scrubbed floors until her knees bled. She mended clothes until her fingers cramped. She ate last and spoke never, and she told herself that this was enough. That survival was enough. Until tonight. The great hall of the Black Claw estate was a cathedral of shadows and stone, lit by iron chandeliers that cast flickering amber light across the assembled pack. The air thrummed with tension, thick, electric, suffocating. Elara stood among the other Omegas at the very back of the hall, pressed so tightly against the cold stone wall that she could feel every groove and crack beneath her shoulder blades. There were perhaps 30 Omegas in total, all of them silent, all of them invisible. Exactly as they were meant to be. At the front of the hall, on a raised dais carved from black marble, sat the Alpha King, Ronan Blackclaw. Even from this distance, Elara could feel the weight of his presence like a physical force. He was massive, easily 6'5", with shoulders broad enough to block out the light. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Sharp jaw, brutal cheekbones, eyes the color of molten amber that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone. He wore all black, leather and steel, no ornamentation, no softness. He didn't need it. Everything about him screamed power. And tonight, that power was focused on the man kneeling in chains at the base of the dais. A traitor. Elara didn't know his name. She didn't know what he'd done. It didn't matter. Traitors were judged swiftly in the Black Claw Pack, and the judgments were always the same. Death. The hall was packed with pack members, betas, enforcers, even a few high-ranking alphas from allied territories. They watched in silence as Ronan stood, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. "You betrayed this pack," Ronan said, his voice deep and cold enough to freeze blood. "You sold our secrets to the Ireclaw territory. You endangered every wolf under my protection." The kneeling man trembled, his head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. Please, Alpha King, I didn't. Silence. The single word cracked through the hall like a whip. The traitor went still. Ronan descended the dais steps with the lethal grace of a wolf closing in on wounded prey. There is no mercy for betrayal, he continued, his amber eyes sweeping across the crowd. Let this be a lesson to anyone who considers turning against their own. Elara's heart hammered in her chest. She didn't want to watch. She didn't want to be here. But Omegas didn't get to choose. Ronan's gaze moved slowly across the hall, over the betas, over the enforcers, over the alphas standing at attention. And then, impossibly, his eyes reached the back of the room. They swept over the Omegas. Over Elara. For one heartbeat, his gaze locked with hers. And in that moment, something inside Elara snapped. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just moved. Her right hand lifted to her collarbone. Her fingers pressed against the hollow of her throat in a gesture so subtle, so small, that anyone who didn't know what to look for would have missed it entirely. But it was there. A signal. An ancient Omega signal passed down through whispered stories and forbidden histories, a gesture that meant I am bound against my will. A plea hidden in silence. A cry for help that only those raised in the old ways would recognize. And Alpha King Ronan Blackclaw froze. His entire body went rigid. His amber eyes widened, just a fraction, and his gaze snapped back to Elara with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. The hall went deathly quiet. No one moved. No one breathed. Ronan stared at Elara as if she were the only person in the room. As if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. And then, in a voice that shook the very foundations of the hall, he spoke. Dismissed. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The traitor lifted his head, confusion and hope warring on his face. Alpha King, one of the betas, ventured carefully. The judgment. I said dismissed, Ronan repeated, his voice sharp as broken glass. His eyes never left Elara. Everyone. Now. The pack members exchanged bewildered glances, but no one dared disobey. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to file out of the hall, betas first, then enforcers, then the alphas. The Omegas started to move as well, shuffling toward the side exit in a silent, obedient mass. But before Elara could take a single step, Ronan's voice cut through the chaos. Not you. Elara's blood turned to ice. Every head in the hall swiveled toward her. Ronan descended the final step of the dais, his gaze locked on her like a predator sighting prey. You, he said, pointing directly at her. Stay. The other Omegas scattered like leaves in a storm, leaving Elara alone at the back of the hall. Alone with the Alpha King. Ronan crossed the distance between them in long, purposeful strides. The traitor was forgotten. The judgment was forgotten. Everything was forgotten except the girl who had made a silent signal. When Ronan stopped in front of her, Elara had to tilt her head back just to meet his eyes. He towered over her, radiating heat and power and something else, something wild and dangerous that made her wolf whimper in the back of her mind. What, Ronan said slowly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, did you just do? Elara's throat closed. Her hands trembled at her sides. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Ronan leaned down, his face inches from hers, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft, deadly soft. That signal. Where did you learn it? Elara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ronan's eyes narrowed. Someone taught you. Someone told you what it meant. His gaze raked over her, taking in her threadbare dress, her too-thin frame, the faint bruises shadowing her wrists. Who hurt you? No one, Elara whispered, the lie automatic, instinctive. Ronan's jaw tightened. Don't lie to me. I'm not. Don't. The word was a command, laced with alpha dominance, so thick it pressed against Elara's skin like a physical weight. Her wolf whimpered again. Submitted. But something deeper inside her, something she didn't fully understand, pushed back. Ronan must have sensed it because his expression shifted. The cold fury in his eyes gave way to something else. Something almost like confusion. He stepped back, creating space between them, and dragged a hand through his dark hair. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Elara." "Elara," he repeated, as if testing the shape of it. His gaze softened, just barely. "How old are you?" 20. Ronan exhaled sharply, a sound somewhere between frustration and disbelief. 20, he muttered under his breath. "God's damned." He turned away from her, pacing toward the dais and back again like a caged wolf. Elara didn't move. Didn't dare. When Ronan finally stopped, he looked at her again, and this time, there was something raw in his expression. Something vulnerable. "That signal you made," he said quietly. "It's from the old ways. Before the modern pacts. Before hierarchy laws." His voice dropped even lower. "It means you're bound against your will. That someone is keeping you captive." Elara said nothing. Ronan took a step closer. "Is that true?" Silence stretched between them, fragile and fraught. And then, barely audible, Elara whispered, "Yes." The word hung in the air like a confession. Like a bomb. Ronan's entire body went still. His amber eyes blazed with something fierce and terrible. And when he spoke again, his voice was a promise wrapped in thunder. "Then everything," he said softly, "is about to change." The silence in the great hall felt alive, breathing, pulsing, waiting. Elara stood frozen beneath the weight of Ronan's gaze, her confession still echoing in the cavernous space. Yes. One word. 3 letters. A truth she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist. But now it was out. And the Alpha King had heard it. Ronan turned away from her, his massive frame rigid with barely contained fury. He moved toward the dais, then stopped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Who?" Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Alpha King, I." "Who?" Ronan repeated, turning to face her again. His amber eyes burned with an intensity that made her wolf cower. "Who's been keeping you bound?" The question was simple. The answer was impossible. Because the truth wasn't just one person. It was an entire system. It was pack law, pack tradition, pack hierarchy. It was every beta who'd turned a blind eye, every enforcer who'd looked the other way, every high-ranking wolf who'd benefited from keeping omegas exactly where they were, powerless, voiceless, invisible. "It's not." Elara's voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forced herself to continue. "It's not one person." Ronan's expression darkened. "Explain." Elara's fingers twisted in the worn fabric of her dress. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to bow her head, to disappear back into the safety of invisibility. But something had shifted tonight. Something had cracked open inside her the moment she'd made that signal. There was no going back. "The pack house," she said quietly. "The Omega quarters. We're not allowed to leave without permission. We work from dawn until midnight. We whatever's left after everyone else has finished. If we speak out of turn, we're punished. If we complain, we're..." She stopped, the words tangling in her throat. Ronan took a step toward her, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You're what, Elara?" She couldn't look at him. Couldn't bear to see whatever expression might be on his face, pity, disgust, disbelief. "We disappear," she whispered. The temperature in the hall seemed to plummet. Ronan went absolutely still. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with ice. "What do you mean, disappear?" "Omegas who cause trouble. Who ask too many questions. Who try to leave." Elara's hands trembled. "They're sent away. Reassigned to other territories, we're told. But no one ever hears from them again. No letters. No visits. Nothing." "How many?" "I don't know. 5? 6? Over the years, How many in the last year?" Elara finally lifted her gaze to meet his. What she saw in his eyes stole her breath, not anger directed at her, but a cold, calculated fury that promised retribution. 2, she said. Maya and Charlotte. They were my friends. Something flickered across Ronan's face, something almost like pain. He dragged a hand down his jaw, the muscles in his neck corded with tension. And you? He asked. Have you tried to leave? Once. The memory burned. When I was 17. What happened? Elara's right wrist ached with phantom pain. She rubbed it absently, feeling the thin ridge of scar tissue hidden beneath her sleeve. Elder Marcus caught me at the territory border. He said I was lucky. That most Omegas who tried to run were killed on sight. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He broke my wrist as a reminder. The sound that came from Ronan was inhuman, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to originate from deep in his chest. His eyes flashed amber gold, his wolf rising dangerously close to the surface. Marcus, he repeated, his voice lethal. Elder Marcus Graythorn? Elara nodded. Ronan's jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. He's been on my council for 15 years. I know. He reports directly to me on Omega welfare. I know. And you're telling me he's been— Ronan cut himself off, turning away sharply. His shoulders heaved with the effort of controlling his wolf. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. Why didn't you report this? Why didn't any of you come to me? The question was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that Elara almost laughed. Almost. Alpha King, she said carefully, Omegas don't speak to Alphas. We certainly don't speak to the Alpha King. We're taught from childhood that you're— She stopped, realizing too late what she was about to say. I'm what? Ronan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Elara's mouth went dry. Dangerous. Unapproachable. We're told that if we ever draw your attention, we'll be punished. That you have no patience for Omega complaints. That you— She faltered under the intensity of his stare. That I what, Elara? That you hate Omegas, she finished quietly. That you see us as weak. Disposable. The silence that followed was deafening. Ronan stared at her as if she'd struck him. His amber eyes searched her face, looking for something— truth, perhaps, or understanding. Is that really what you believe? He asked finally, his voice strangely hollow. Elara didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was complicated. She'd spent her entire life learning to fear him, to avoid him, to treat his very existence as a threat. But tonight, standing in this empty hall with his full attention on her, she didn't feel afraid. She felt seen. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a crack in that impenetrable armor. He moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. I'm going to tell you something, he said quietly, and I need you to hear me. Can you do that? Elara nodded. I didn't know. The words came out rough, almost pained. About the Omega quarters. About Marcus. About any of it. I built this pack on strength and loyalty, but he exhaled sharply. I delegated Omega affairs to the council. I trusted them to handle it fairly. And that was my failure. Alpha King. Ronan. He cut her off gently. When it's just us, call me Ronan. The request was so unexpected, so intimate, that Elara's breath caught. I don't understand, she said. Why are you telling me this? Why do you even care? I'm just an Omega. I'm nobody. Ronan's eyes flashed. In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them, and before Elara could react, he'd cupped her face in his hands, large, warm, surprisingly gentle. Don't, he said fiercely. Don't ever call yourself nobody. Elara's heart stopped. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his amber eyes. Could smell his scent, pine and smoke, and something wild that made her wolf stir in ways she didn't understand. You made a signal tonight, Ronan continued, his voice low and intense. A signal that should have been lost to history. A signal that requires courage most wolves will never possess. You looked at me, at the Alpha King, and you asked for help, knowing it could mean your death. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, featherlight. That's not nobody, Elara. That's extraordinary. Warmth flooded through her chest, unfamiliar, overwhelming, terrifying. I don't feel extraordinary, she whispered. I feel scared. Good. Ronan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Fear keeps you alive. But so does courage. And you, Elara. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. You have more courage in your little finger than most of my enforcers have in their entire bodies. The compliment should have felt impossible. The Alpha King didn't praise Omegas. He didn't touch them gently. He didn't look at them like they mattered. But here he was, doing all three. What happens now? Elara asked, her voice barely audible. Ronan's expression hardened with determination. Now I fix this. He released her face slowly, as if reluctant to let go. But first, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to tell me everything. Every detail about the Omega Quarters, every rule, every punishment, every name of every wolf who's hurt you or your friends. His eyes blazed. And then I need you to trust me to make it right. Trust. The word felt foreign, impossible. Elara had learned long ago that trust was a luxury Omegas couldn't afford. But as she stood there, looking up at the most dangerous wolf in the territory, she felt something shift inside her. Something fragile and new and terrifying. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll tell you everything. Ronan's expression softened with relief. Thank you. He stepped back, creating professional distance once more, and pulled a small communication device from his pocket. He pressed a button, and moments later, a voice crackled through. Alpha King. Theo, Ronan said, his voice all business now. I need you in the Great Hall. Immediately. And bring Liam. Yes, Alpha King. Ronan pocketed the device and turned back to Elara. Theo is my beta. Liam is head of my personal guard. They're the only wolves in this pack I trust completely. He paused. I'm going to have them hear your story too. They need to understand what's been happening. Is that all right? The question surprised her. He was asking permission, giving her choice. No one had ever done that before. Yes, Elara said. Within minutes, the side doors of the Great Hall opened and two wolves entered. The first was tall and lean with dark brown hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Theo, she assumed. The second was broader, built like a brick wall, with close-cropped blonde hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. That had to be Liam. Both of them stopped short when they saw Elara standing with Ronan. Alpha King. Theo said carefully, his gaze moving between them. What's going on? Ronan's expression was grim. We have a problem. A big one. He gestured to Elara. This is Elara. She's an Omega. And she's just informed me that the Omega Quarters have been operating as a prison camp for years right under our noses. Theo's eyes widened. Liam's jaw dropped. What? Liam said. That's not, how is that possible? Because I delegated, Ronan said bitterly. Because I trusted the council to handle Omega welfare and I never thought to verify. He looked at Elara, his expression softening. But that ends tonight. Elara is going to tell us everything. And then we're going to tear down every single system that allowed this to happen. Theo and Liam exchanged glances, then nodded. Where do you want to start? Theo asked. Ronan pulled out a chair from one of the long tables. Sit, he told Elara gently. This might take a while. Elara sat, her hands folded in her lap, her heart racing. And for the next 2 hours, she told them everything. She told them about the locked doors and the monitored exits. She told them about the meager rations and the 18-hour workdays. She told them about Maya and Charlotte and the others who'd disappeared. She told them about Elder Marcus and his broken wrist lessons. She told them about the silence, the fear, the crushing weight of invisibility. And through it all, Ronan listened with an expression that grew darker and more furious with every word. When she finally finished, her voice hoarse and her hands trembling, the hall was silent. Theo looked pale. Liam's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And Ronan looked like he wanted to burn the world down. I'm going to kill him, he said quietly. Marcus. I'm going to rip his throat out with my bare hands. Ronan, Theo started. Don't, Ronan snapped. Don't tell me to be calm. Don't tell me to think strategically. He tortured a 17-year-old girl. He made Omegas disappear. He looked me in the eye for 15 years and lied. I know, Theo said evenly. And he'll pay for it. But we need to be smart about this. If you kill Marcus without proof, the council will call it alpha tyranny. They'll use it against you. Ronan's eyes flashed dangerously. Then we get proof. How? Liam asked. We investigate. Tonight. Ronan turned to Elara. Can you take us to the Omega quarters? Fear spiked through her chest. Now. Yes. I want to see it for myself. I want documentation. I want evidence of every single violation. His voice softened. But only if you're willing. I won't force you. Elara's mind raced. Going back to the Omega quarters terrified her. But the thought of things continuing as they were, of other Omegas suffering the way she had, was worse. I'll take you, she said. Ronan's expression filled with something that looked almost like pride. Thank you. He stood, and the others followed suit. Liam, get a documentation team together, Ronan ordered. Cameras, recorders, everything. Theo, wake up my personal attorney. Tell her to meet us in my office at dawn. She'll need to prepare charges. What about Marcus? Theo asked. Ronan's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. Leave Marcus to me. As they moved toward the doors, Elara felt a strange sense of unreality settle over her. Hours ago, she'd been invisible. Powerless. Trapped. Now, the Alpha King himself was dismantling the system that had held her captive. It felt like a dream. Or a trap. As if reading her thoughts, Ronan paused at the door and looked back at her. Elara, he said quietly. I know you have no reason to trust me yet. I know this all seems impossible. But I need you to understand something. She waited. That signal you made tonight? His amber eyes held hers with devastating intensity. That was the bravest thing I've seen in my entire life. And I promise you on my life, on my crown, on everything I am, I will not let you down. The words wrapped around her like a vow, like a promise written in fire. And despite every lesson she'd learned about trusting alphas, about trusting anyone, Elara felt something crack open in her chest. Hope. Fragile and terrifying and absolutely undeniable. Okay, she whispered. Ronan held out his hand. And after a moment's hesitation, Elara took it. His hand was warm and solid and steady, an anchor in a storm she hadn't realized she was drowning in. Together, they walked out of the great hall. And with every step, Elara felt the weight of 20 years of silence begin to lift. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. The Omega quarters were located in the eastern wing of the Blackclaw estate, as far from the main pack house as physically possible without leaving the territory entirely. Elara had made this walk thousands of times. Always alone. Always in darkness. Always with her head down and her footsteps quick, hoping to avoid attention. Tonight was different. Tonight, she walked flanked by the Alpha King himself, with Theo and Liam trailing behind, and a team of 4 enforcers carrying documentation equipment. Tonight, she wasn't invisible. The stone corridors grew narrower as they moved deeper into the eastern wing. The polished marble floors of the main house gave way to rough concrete. The ornate light fixtures became bare bulbs hanging from exposed wires. Even the air changed, growing staler, damper, colder. Jesus, Liam muttered under his breath. I didn't even know this part of the estate existed. Most don't, Elara said quietly. That's the point. Ronan said nothing, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. They reached a heavy iron door at the end of the corridor. It had no handle on the outside, only a keypad lock that glowed faintly red in the dim light. This is it, Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ronan stared at the door as if it had personally offended him. It's locked from the outside. Yes. How do you get in and out? We don't. Not without permission. Elara pointed to a small intercom system mounted beside the door. We request exit through that. Someone has to approve it and unlock the door remotely. Who controls the locks? The Omega supervisor. Beth. She reports to Elder Marcus. Ronan's expression darkened further. He turned to one of the enforcers. Break it. The enforcer, a massive wolf named Aaron, stepped forward and examined the lock. I can override it, Alpha King. Give me 30 seconds. While Aaron worked, Elara became aware of eyes watching from the shadows. The other Omegas would know something was wrong. Strangers never came to this wing. Enforcers certainly never came here. And the Alpha King. The Alpha King was a nightmare they'd been taught to avoid at all costs. Elara, Ronan said quietly, drawing her attention. When we go inside, I need you to stay close to me. Can you do that? She nodded, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. The lock clicked. Aaron pulled the door open. The smell hit them first. Mildew. Unwashed bodies. Something sour and wrong that made Elara's stomach turn even though she'd grown accustomed to it years ago. Ronan inhaled sharply, his hand moving to cover his nose. Gods. They stepped through the doorway into a long, narrow hallway lined with doors on either side. The walls were water-stained and crumbling. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting everything in a sickly greenish glow. How many Omegas live here? Theo asked, his voice tight. 32, Elara answered. 4 to a room. 4 to a Liam cut himself off, shaking his head in disbelief. That's insane. It's efficient, Elara said flatly. That's what we're told. Ronan moved deeper into the hallway, his amber eyes taking in every detail. When he reached the first door, he pushed it open without knocking. Inside was a room no bigger than a prison cell. 4 narrow cots were pushed against the walls, barely 2 feet apart. There was a single small window covered with bars. No decorations. No personal belongings. No warmth. 3 Omegas sat on their cots, their eyes wide with terror at the sight of the Alpha King in their doorway. Alpha King, one of them stammered, scrambling to her feet. We weren't. Sit, Ronan said, his voice gentle in a way that clearly surprised them. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to help. The Omegas exchanged uncertain glances, but slowly sat back down. Ronan turned to the documentation team. Record everything. Every room. Every condition. I want photographic evidence of all of it. As the enforcers dispersed to document the quarters, Ronan moved from room to room, his expression growing darker with each door he opened. Elara followed close behind, her chest tight with a mixture of vindication and shame. This was her life. Her reality. And seeing it through Ronan's eyes, seeing the horror and disgust on his face, made her realize just how wrong it all was. How wrong it had always been. They reached the communal bathroom, a single room with 3 stalls, 2 sinks, and 1 shower for 32 wolves. Ronan stood in the doorway, utterly silent. We have assigned times, Elara said quietly. 5 minutes each. If you take longer, you lose your next turn. 5 minutes, Ronan repeated, his voice hollow. Yes. He closed his eyes, his hands curling into fists. When he opened them again, they burned with barely contained rage. Show me the rest. Elara led him to the common area, a cramped space with a few broken chairs and a single table. This was where they ate, where they spent their few precious hours of free time, where they existed in the spaces between work shifts. On the wall was a chart. Work assignments. Schedules. Rules. So many rules. Omegas will rise at 5 a.m. Omegas will be in bed by 11 p.m. Omegas will not speak unless spoken to. Omegas will not leave the quarters without express permission. Omegas will not question authority. Omegas will not. The list went on and on. Ronan read every word, his expression growing more and more dangerous. This is slavery, he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. This is actual, literal slavery. It's pack hierarchy, a cold voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Elder Marcus Greythorn stood in the entrance to the Omega quarters, flanked by two of his personal guards. He was a tall, thin wolf with silver hair and ice-blue eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Alpha King, Marcus said, inclining his head in a mockery of respect. What brings you to this part of the estate? Ronan turned slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Marcus, he said softly, I was just admiring your handiwork. Marcus's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you mean. No? Ronan gestured around the room. The locked doors. The prison cell bedrooms. The 5-minute showers. The 18-hour workdays. His voice dropped to something lethal. The disappearing Omegas. For just a moment, something flickered in Marcus's expression. Fear, maybe. Or calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by cool indifference. The Omega quarters are run according to traditional pack law, Marcus said smoothly. Everything here is documented and approved by the council. If you have concerns, Alpha King, I'm happy to present the relevant paperwork. I don't need paperwork, Ronan cut him off. I have something better. I have testimony. Marcus's gaze slid to Elara, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. Recognition. And fury. Ah, Marcus said softly. I see. The little runaway has been telling stories. Don't, Ronan growled, moving to place himself between Marcus and Elara. Don't you dare speak to her. She's an Omega, Alpha King. It's my job to speak to her. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She's under my supervision, after all. Not anymore, Ronan said flatly. As of this moment, Elara is under my personal protection. You will not speak to her, approach her, or even look at her without my express permission. Am I clear? Marcus's smile tightened. Alpha King, with all due respect, you're overstepping. Omega management falls under council jurisdiction. You gave us that authority 15 years ago. Then I'm taking it back. You can't. I'm the Alpha King, Ronan snarled, and the words came out wrapped in Alpha command so powerful that Marcus's guards immediately dropped to their knees, exposing their throats in submission. I can do whatever I damn well please. And what pleases me right now is removing you from any position of authority over Omegas. Marcus didn't kneel, but Elara could see the effort it took him to resist the command. His face had gone pale, his jaw clenched. This is a mistake, Marcus said tightly. The council won't stand for this. You're disrupting centuries of tradition based on the word of one disgruntled Omega. Her name is Elara, Ronan interrupted. And I have 32 witnesses. 32 Omegas who will testify to your abuse. 32 wolves who will confirm everything she's told me. He took a step toward Marcus, predatory and deliberate. But more than that, I have her. He gestured to Elara, and she felt the weight of every eye in the room. This Omega, Ronan continued, his voice ringing with authority, made a signal tonight. An old signal. A signal that shouldn't exist anymore because it comes from a time when Omegas had rights. When they had protections. His amber eyes blazed. Do you know what that signal means, Marcus? Marcus said nothing. It means I am bound against my will. Ronan's voice dropped to something deadly. It means someone has taken away her freedom, her choice, her autonomy. And under the old laws, the laws that every pack is still bound by, whether we remember them or not, that is an offense punishable by death. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's face had gone from pale to ashen. You can't seriously be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Ronan said coldly. I'm stating it. You broke the old laws, Marcus. You violated sacred protections. And tomorrow morning, the entire council will hear the evidence. Every photograph. Every testimony. Every single detail of what you've done here. This is insanity, Marcus hissed. Over an Omega? You're willing to tear apart the pack hierarchy, to undermine centuries of tradition, because one girl made a dramatic gesture. No, Ronan said quietly. I'm willing to do it because it's right. The words hung in the air like a bell toll. Marcus stared at Ronan, and Elara could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The weighing of options. The measuring of outcomes. Finally, Marcus smiled, a thin, dangerous thing. Very well, Alpha King. If you want to make this an official matter, we'll make it official. He inclined his head in a mocking bow. I look forward to tomorrow's council meeting. I'm sure it will be illuminating. He turned and swept out of the Omega quarters, his guards scrambling to follow. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room exploded. Ronan, Theo said urgently, moving to his side. He's going to spin this. He's going to make it look like you're being manipulated. Let him try, Ronan said flatly. I have evidence. I have witnesses. And I have the old laws on my side. The council doesn't care about old laws, Liam warned. Half of them benefit from the current system. They're going to fight you on this. Then I'll fight back. This could split the pack, Theo said quietly. This could start a civil war. Ronan turned to look at Elara, his expression softening in a way that made her chest ache. I don't care, he said simply. It's worth it. Elara's breath caught. Worth it. She was worth it. The thought was so foreign, so impossible, that she almost couldn't process it. But before she could respond, a commotion erupted from one of the hallway rooms. Raised voices. A scream. Ronan moved instantly, his body coiling with predatory grace as he sprinted toward the sound. Elara followed, her heart in her throat. They burst into one of the sleeping quarters to find Aaron, the enforcer who'd broken the lock, standing frozen in the center of the room. His face had gone white. His hands were shaking. Alpha King, he said, his voice rough. You need to see this. He pointed to the corner of the room, behind one of the cots. Ronan moved closer, and Elara saw his entire body go rigid. What is that? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Aaron swallowed hard. It's a collar, Alpha King. Iron. He stopped, as if unable to continue. With what? Ronan demanded. With a suppression sigil engraved on the inside. The room went deathly silent. Elara's blood turned to ice. Suppression sigils were ancient magic, dark magic, designed to suppress a wolf's spawn senses. To block mate connections. To prevent wolves from recognizing their true mates. They'd been outlawed for over a century. Where did you find this? Ronan asked, his voice dangerous. Under the floorboards. Aaron pointed to a loose board that had been pried up. There's more. 5 of them. All with the same sigil. Ronan bent down and picked up one of the collars with shaking hands. The iron was old, tarnished, but the sigil carved into the inside was still clearly visible, a twisted symbol that made Elara's wolf recoil in horror. These have been used recently, Ronan said quietly. Within the last few months. How can you tell? Theo asked. Because they still smell like Omega. Ronan's eyes snapped to Elara. Have you ever worn one of these? No, Elara said immediately. I've never seen them before. But other Omegas have. It wasn't a question. Elara thought back over the years. Thought about the Omegas who'd disappeared. Maya. Charlotte. Others whose names she could barely remember. Maybe, she whispered. I don't know. Some of the Omegas who disappeared, they said they felt strange before they were taken. Like they couldn't think clearly. Like something was wrong with their wolves. Ronan's expression turned murderous. They were collared. Suppressed. And then they were taken. But why? Liam asked. What's the point of suppressing an Omega's mate bond? The question hung in the air. And then, slowly, horribly, understanding dawned on Ronan's face. Because, he said quietly, someone didn't want them recognizing their true mates. Someone wanted to control who they bonded with. Or prevent them from bonding at all. Theo's eyes widened. That's an extinction-level offense. If the High Council found out, they'd execute everyone involved, Ronan finished. His gaze moved to Elara, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like fear. Elara. Have you ever felt strange? disconnected from your wolf. Elara faltered. Because the truth was, she had felt strange. For years. A persistent sense of something missing, something wrong, something just out of reach. She'd assumed it was normal. That this was just how Omegas felt. Sometimes, she admitted. But I thought. She never finished the sentence. Because in that moment, Ronan stepped closer to her, and something shifted. The air between them seemed to thicken, to crackle with energy. Elara's wolf, which had been quiet and subdued for as long as she could remember, suddenly surged to the surface with a force that stole her breath. Mine, her wolf whispered. Mate. Mine. Elara gasped, stumbling backward. Ronan caught her, his hands gripping her arms, and the moment they touched, it was like lightning striking. The bond snapped into place. Not forming. Not building. Revealing itself. Because it had always been there. Hidden. Suppressed. Buried beneath magic that should never have been used. No, Elara whispered, even as her wolf howled with joy. No, this isn't. You're my mate, Ronan said, his voice rough with shock and something that sounded like awe. You've always been my mate. Elara shook her head frantically, trying to back away, but Ronan held her steady. That's why you made the signal, he continued, the pieces falling into place. That's why I felt it so strongly. Why I couldn't ignore it. Why everything in me demanded I protect you. His amber eyes searched hers desperately. Did you know? No, Elara choked out. I couldn't. Someone suppressed your bond, Ronan said, and his voice had gone deadly cold. Someone deliberately kept you from recognizing me as your mate. But who? Theo demanded. Who would do that? Ronan's jaw clenched. Someone who knew that if the Alpha King claimed his true mate, the power dynamic would shift. Someone who benefited from keeping Omegas powerless. His eyes blazed with fury. Marcus. We don't know that for certain, Liam said carefully. Don't we? Ronan turned to face his beta and head guard. He's been in charge of Omegas for 15 years. He had access. He had motive. And he had these. He held up the suppression collar. How much do you want to bet that if we investigate every Omega who disappeared, we'll find they were potential mates to high-ranking wolves? The implication was staggering. Horrifying. He was preventing mate bonds, Theo said slowly. Controlling which wolves could mate. Maintaining the hierarchy by making sure Omegas stayed at the bottom. And killing or disappearing anyone who threatened that system, Ronan finished. He turned back to Elara, his expression softening. Including you. Elara's mind was spinning. Mate. She was Ronan's mate. The Alpha King's true mate. It was impossible. It was terrifying. It was, right? Deep in her soul, in the place where her wolf lived, it felt absolutely, undeniably right. What does this mean? She whispered. Ronan's hands came up to cup her face, the gesture achingly gentle. It means, he said quietly, that everything just changed. Again. The prophecy, Theo breathed. Jesus Christ, Ronan. The prophecy. Ronan's expression went very still. What prophecy? The old one. From the archives. Theo's face had gone pale. I thought it was just legend, but when the Alpha King claims the silenced Omega, the old hierarchy will fall. The words echoed through the room like a death knell. Elara's blood ran cold. I don't understand. Ronan's amber eyes were locked on hers, and she could see the war happening behind them. The battle between duty and destiny. Between pack law and mate bond. There's an old prophecy, he said quietly. It speaks of an Alpha King who would find his true mate among the Omegas. And when he claimed her, it would trigger a revolution. The entire pack hierarchy would crumble. The old ways would return. That's why they suppressed the bond, Liam realized. They knew. The council, or at least Marcus, they knew about the prophecy. They knew Elara was your mate. So they made sure you'd never recognize her. And they almost succeeded, Ronan said, his voice rough. If she hadn't made that signal tonight, if I hadn't investigated, We would have gone our entire lives never knowing. The weight of it crashed over Elara like a wave. This wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't just about abuse or injustice or even freedom. This was about the entire future of the pack. What do we do? She asked, her voice small. Ronan's expression hardened with determination. He pulled her closer until she could feel the steady beat of his heart through his chest. Tomorrow, he said, we go before the council. We present the evidence. We expose Marcus and anyone else involved in this conspiracy. His eyes blazed with golden fire. And we claim what's ours. The bond? Elara whispered. Everything, Ronan corrected. The bond. Your freedom. Your life. His voice dropped to something fierce and possessive. You're my mate, Elara. My true mate. And I will burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone take you from me. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like a promise. Like salvation. Like home. Okay, Elara breathed. Ronan smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of her prison with her mate's arms around her, Elara felt something she'd never experienced before. Power. The prophecy was real. The bond was real. And tomorrow, the entire world would know it. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Elara had imagined. She'd expected coldness. Austerity. The same brutal efficiency that defined everything else about Ronan's public persona. Instead, she found warmth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the northern forest, where moonlight painted the trees in silver. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling softly in the hearth. The furniture was dark wood and soft leather, lived in, comfortable. Books lined the shelves, their spines worn from use. It was a room designed for a person, not a king. Sit, Ronan said gently, gesturing to a couch near the fireplace. Please. Elara perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands twisted in her lap. It was nearly 3 a.m. They'd spent the last hour documenting everything in the Omega quarters, collecting evidence, taking statements from terrified Omegas who could barely believe the Alpha King himself was listening to them. Now, finally, they were alone. Well, not completely alone. Theo and Liam stood near the door, providing a buffer of safety and propriety. Because despite the mate bond humming between them like a live wire, Elara was still an unclaimed Omega in the Alpha King's private chambers. The scandal potential was astronomical. We need to talk about tomorrow, Ronan said, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. He'd shed his formal jacket somewhere along the way, and his white shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with faint scars. Elara tried not to stare. Failed. Ronan's lips quirked slightly, as if he knew exactly where her attention had gone. The council meets at dawn. That gives us, he glanced at the clock on the mantel, 3 hours to prepare. Prepare for what? Elara asked. War, Theo said bluntly from his position by the door. Because that's what this is going to be. Ronan shot him a look, but didn't disagree. The council consists of 12 elders, he explained to Elara. Marcus is one of them. They advise me on pack matters, but they also have significant autonomy in their respective areas of authority. Marcus controlled Omega affairs. Elder Catherine controls trade and commerce. Elder James oversees security. And so on. They're not going to be happy about you undermining Marcus's authority, Liam added. Even if they don't know about the suppression collars, and my guess is most of them don't, they're going to see this as you overstepping. Let them, Ronan said coldly. Ronan. Theo moved closer, his expression serious. You need to understand what you're risking here. If you claim Elara as your mate tomorrow, if you present the prophecy as real, you're essentially declaring war on the entire council structure. Half of them will see it as a direct threat to their power. Because it is, Ronan said flatly. That's the point of the prophecy. The old hierarchy will fall. Which means their positions, their authority, their comfortable little kingdoms, all of it goes away. And they'll fight to keep it, Theo pressed. with everything they have. Elara's stomach twisted with anxiety. Maybe we shouldn't, she stopped, unsure how to finish. Shouldn't what? Shouldn't claim the bond? Shouldn't tell the truth? Ronan's attention snapped to her immediately. What were you going to say? She swallowed hard. Maybe we shouldn't tell them about the mate bond. Not yet. We could just focus on the Omega quarters, the abuse, the suppression collars. No, the word was absolute. Ronan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his amber eyes intense. Elara, listen to me. The mate bond isn't something we can hide. Not anymore. The moment it snapped into place, anyone with alpha-level senses would be able to detect it. The second we walk into that council chamber together, they'll know. He's right, Liam said quietly. Mate bonds have a specific sense signature. It's unmistakable. So we're trapped, Elara said, her voice hollow. No, Ronan reached out and took her hand, his touch sending warmth flooding through her. We're free. For the first time in your life, Elara, you're free. Because you're not just an Omega anymore. You're my mate. My true mate. And that makes you untouchable. Unless they reject the bond, Theo said carefully. If the council votes to invalidate it. They can't, Ronan interrupted. True mate bonds are sacred. Even the council can't overturn them. They can try, Theo countered. If they claim the bond was formed under duress, or through manipulation, or... They can claim whatever they want, Ronan said, his voice hardening. It won't change reality. Elara is my mate. Nothing is going to change that. The conviction in his voice made Elara's chest ache. He barely knew her. They'd spoken for maybe 4 hours total. And yet he was willing to risk everything, his crown, his pack, his entire kingdom, to protect her. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was completely insane. Why? She whispered. Ronan's expression softened. Why what? Why are you doing this? You could walk away. Reject the bond. Tell the council it was a mistake. Her voice cracked. You could protect yourself. Elara. I'm nobody, she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. I'm an Omega. I have no status, no power, no value to the pack. You're the Alpha King. You could have anyone. Why would you risk everything for me? The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Then Ronan stood, moved to the couch, and sat beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Can I tell you something? He asked quietly. Elara nodded. I've been Alpha King for 7 years. Do you know what that's been like? She shook her head. Lonely, Ronan said simply. I've had advisors, allies, pack members who respect me or at least fear me enough to obey. But I've never had anyone who just sees me. Not the crown. Not the title. Not the power. Just me. He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. But tonight, he continued, when you made that signal, when you looked at me with those terrified eyes and asked for help anyway, I felt something I've never felt before. Purpose. Real purpose. Not duty or obligation or pack law. Just knowing that I was meant to protect you. That you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. His hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining. So to answer your question, Ronan said softly, I'm doing this because the moment I saw you, everything changed. My wolf recognized you. My soul recognized you. And I don't care if you're an Omega or an Alpha or anything in between. You're mine. And I protect what's mine. Tears burned in Elara's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered. Like she was everything. I don't know how to be a mate, she whispered. I don't know how to be anything except invisible. Then we'll figure it out together, Ronan said. But first, we survive tomorrow. And if the council rejects us? Ronan's expression hardened. Then I'll dissolve the council. Ronan, Theo warned. I mean it. Ronan stood, his alpha authority radiating from him like heat. I've spent 7 years building this pack, strengthening our territory, creating alliances. But I've also watched the council grow more and more corrupt. more focused on maintaining their own power than serving the pack. His amber eyes blazed. Maybe the prophecy is exactly what we need. Maybe it's time to burn down the old hierarchy and build something better. You're talking about a revolution, Liam said quietly. I'm talking about justice, Ronan corrected. For Elara. For every Omega who's been abused, suppressed, or disappeared. For every wolf who's been denied their true mate because it didn't fit someone's political agenda. He looked at Elara. I'm talking about making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. The conviction in his voice sent shivers down her spine. What do you need from me? She asked. Tomorrow, you're going to stand before the council and tell your story. All of it. The abuse, the suppression, everything. Ronan's gaze held hers. It's going to be terrifying. They're going to try to discredit you, to make you seem unreliable or manipulative. But I need you to stay strong. Can you do that? Elara thought about Maya and Charlotte. About all the Omegas still trapped in those quarters. About 20 years of silence and fear and believing she was worthless. Yes, she said firmly. I can do that. Ronan smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Good. We should prepare her testimony, Theo said, moving to a desk in the corner. Write down everything. Make sure we have a clear narrative. No. Everyone turned to look at Ronan. No scripts, he said. No prepared statements. Elara tells it in her own words, exactly as it happened. That's more powerful than any testimony we could craft. But if she stumbles, if she gets confused, Theo started. Then she stumbles, Ronan said. And it will be authentic. The council needs to hear the truth, not a polished performance. Elara's heart swelled with gratitude. He was giving her control, trusting her voice. It was more than anyone had ever given her before. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Liam said hesitantly. The prophecy. Ronan's expression grew serious. What about it? If we present it as real, if we claim that Elara is the silenced Omega and you're going to fulfill it, we need to understand what we're actually claiming. Liam pulled a small, worn book from the inside pocket of his jacket. I stopped by the archives on the way here. Found the original text. He opened the book to a marked page and read aloud. When the Alpha King claims the silenced Omega, the old hierarchy will fall. Blood will answer blood. And the bound will be made whole. 3 trials will test their bond. 3 enemies will rise to destroy it. And only truth spoken in darkness will light the way to dawn. Silence fell over the room. 3 trials, Theo said slowly. 3 enemies. That's ominous. It's a prophecy, Ronan said. They're always ominous. But it means this isn't over tomorrow, Liam pressed. Even if we win the council vote, even if we expose Marcus, this is just the beginning. There will be more challenges. More threats. Ronan looked at Elara, his expression unreadable. Are you willing to face that? Knowing it could get dangerous. Elara thought about the alternative. Going back to the Omega quarters. Living in fear. Watching more friends disappear. I'm already in danger, she said quietly. I have been my entire life. At least now I have someone fighting beside me. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Ronan's eyes. Always, he promised. I will always fight beside you. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Then Theo cleared his throat awkwardly. Right. Well, since we're all committed to possible death and revolution, maybe we should try to get a couple hours of sleep. Ronan blinked, as if remembering they weren't alone. Right. Yes. He turned to Elara. You'll stay here tonight. In the guest suite. He must have seen the panic flash across her face, because he added quickly, it's completely separate from my chambers. Locked door. Liam will stand guard outside to make sure no one bothers you. I will. Liam asked. You will, Ronan confirmed. What about you? Elara asked. I'll be working with Theo to organize the evidence and prepare for tomorrow. Ronan's expression softened. But I'm just down the hall if you need me. For anything. The implication hung in the air. He was giving her space, But he was available, accessible, safe. It was more consideration than Elara had experienced in her entire life. "Thank you," she whispered. Ronan smiled gently. "Come on. I'll show you the suite." He led her through a connecting door into a smaller, but equally beautiful room. The bed was enormous, covered in soft blankets and pillows. There was a private bathroom with a tub that looked like it could fit 3 people. Windows overlooked the gardens, where dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "There are clothes in the closet," Ronan said. "They might be too big, but they're clean. And there's food in the sitting area if you're hungry." Elara stared at the room, overwhelmed. This is too much." "It's the bare minimum," Ronan corrected. "And tomorrow, after the council meeting, we'll make sure you have everything you need. Permanently." He moved toward the door, then stopped, his hand on the frame. When he looked back at her, his expression was conflicted, torn between wanting to stay and knowing he should go. "Elara," he said quietly, "I know this is all happening incredibly fast. I know you have no reason to trust me yet. But I need you to know something." "What?" "I'm not going to claim you until you're ready. The mate bond is there, and it's real, but the claiming, the marking, the completion of the bond, that doesn't happen until you want it. Until you choose it." His amber eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "You've had enough choices taken from you. I'm not going to be another person who steals your agency." The words cracked something open in Elara's chest. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Ronan nodded once, then stepped out of the room. The door closed softly behind him, and Elara was alone. She moved to the bed and sat down, the mattress so soft it felt like sitting on clouds. Through the walls, she could hear the low murmur of Ronan and Theo talking, planning, preparing for the battle ahead. Her battle. Their battle. Elara's hand drifted to her collarbone, to the place where she'd made the signal. The signal that had changed everything. She didn't regret it. Even knowing what was coming, the council meeting, the prophecy, the 3 trials and 3 enemies, and all the danger that implied, she didn't regret it. Because for the first time in 20 years, Elara felt like she was living instead of just surviving. And that was worth fighting for. Outside, the sun continued to rise, painting the world in gold and fire. Dawn was coming, and with it, everything would change. 3 hours later, Elara stood outside the council chamber doors, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd managed maybe an hour of fitful sleep before giving up and taking a long shower in that impossibly luxurious bathroom. She'd found clothes in the closet, a simple dress in deep blue that was indeed too big but could be belted at the waist. Someone, probably Ronan, had left soft leather boots by the door in what looked like her size. Now, dressed and as ready as she'd ever be, she waited. The doors were massive, dark wood carved with wolves in various poses of power and dominance. She could hear voices inside. Many voices, all of them raised in argument. "They've been at it for 20 minutes, Liam said quietly from his position beside her. Ronan presented the evidence from the Omega quarters. "It didn't go well." "What do you mean?" "Half the council is calling it fabricated. The other half is trying to minimize it. Marcus is claiming you manipulated Ronan, that you're using the mate bond to gain power." Liam's expression was grim. "It's ugly in there." Elara's stomach twisted with anxiety. "Maybe I shouldn't." The doors burst open. Ronan stood in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. When he saw Elara, some of the tension in his shoulders eased. "They want to hear from you directly," he said. "Are you ready?" No. She wasn't ready. She'd never be ready. But she nodded anyway. Ronan held out his hand. "Together," he said softly. Elara placed her hand in his. And together, they walked into the council chamber. The room was circular, with 12 chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform where Ronan's throne sat. All 12 council members were present, 6 men, 6 women, all of them older, all of them radiating power and authority. and all of them staring at Elara like she was an interesting insect they were considering crushing. Elder Marcus sat at the far left, his ice-blue eyes fixed on her with unconcealed hatred. "So," said an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Elder Catherine," Elara guessed. "This is the Omega who's caused all this trouble." "This is Elara," Ronan corrected sharply, his hand tightening on hers. "My true mate. And you will address her with respect." "Your alleged true mate," Marcus interjected smoothly. "We have yet to verify that claim." "The bond is obvious to anyone with functioning senses," Ronan said coldly. "Or obvious to anyone who wants to believe it's real," Marcus countered. "Bonds can be faked, Alpha King. Especially by ambitious Omegas looking to improve their station." Elara felt Ronan's fury spike, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. "I didn't fake anything," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I didn't even know mate bonds could be faked until 30 seconds ago." A few of the council members exchanged glances. "Tell us, child," said an older man with kind eyes, Elder James, perhaps. "In your own words, what happened last night?" Elara took a breath and began to speak. She told them about the Omega quarters, about the locked doors and the 5-minute showers and the 18-hour workdays. She told them about Maya and Charlotte and the others who'd disappeared. She told them about Elder Marcus breaking her wrist when she'd tried to run. And she told them about the signal, about making the choice to ask for help, knowing it could mean her death. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking and tears were streaming down her face. The council chamber was silent. Then Elder Catherine leaned forward. "You claim Elder Marcus broke your wrist. Can you prove it?" Elara's breath caught. Slowly, she rolled up her right sleeve, revealing the thin white scar that circled her wrist like a bracelet. "This healed wrong," she said quietly, "because I wasn't allowed medical attention. Elder Marcus said it was my punishment for defiance." More silence. Then Marcus laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "A scar," he said. "That's your proof? Omegas are clumsy. They hurt themselves all the time. This proves nothing." "What about the suppression colors?" Ronan interjected. "The ones we found hidden in the Omega quarters? The ones with your scent all over them?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I've never seen those colors before. Someone must have planted them." "We have photographs," Theo said from his position by the wall. "Documentation. Testimony from 32 Omegas. Testimony from wolves who have everything to gain by lying," Marcus interrupted. "They want better conditions. They want more freedom. Of course they'll support whatever story this girl tells." "This girl is the Alpha King's mate," Ronan snarled. "So you claim," Marcus said smoothly. "But I see no mark. No completed bond. Just a convenient story that gives an Omega unprecedented power." He turned to address the full council. "Think about it. An Omega claims to be the Alpha King's true mate. She uses an ancient signal that none of us have seen in centuries. She tells stories of abuse that conveniently can't be proven. And she demands we overturn our entire hierarchy to accommodate her." He smiled coldly. "It's the perfect manipulation." "It's the truth," Elara said desperately. "Is it?" Marcus stood, moving toward her with predatory grace. "Or is it an elaborate scheme to elevate yourself? To escape your station? To become something you were never meant to be?" He was close now. Close enough that Elara could smell the malice rolling off him. "You forget your place, Omega," Marcus whispered, low enough that only she and Ronan could hear. "You forget what happens to those who challenge me." It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. And in that moment, Elara's wolf, silent and suppressed for so long, surged to the surface with a roar. "No," Elara said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "You forget your place." She stepped forward, forcing Marcus to step back. "I know what you did," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I know about the suppression colors. I know about the Omegas you disappeared. I know about the mate bonds you destroyed because they threatened your power." Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment. It was enough. And I know, Elara said quietly, that you're terrified. Because the prophecy is real. The old hierarchy is falling. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. The council chamber erupted. Half the elders were shouting questions. The other half were calling for order. Marcus was denying everything, his voice rising to match the chaos. And through it all, Ronan stood beside Elara, his hand in hers, his presence steady and sure. Enough. The command cracked through the chamber like thunder. Everyone fell silent. Ronan stepped forward, his alpha authority radiating from him in waves that pressed against every wolf in the room. Elder Marcus, he said quietly, I'm officially removing you from the council, effective immediately. You will be held for investigation into charges of Omega abuse, suppression of mate bonds, and conspiracy to violate sacred wolf law. You can't do that, Marcus hissed. I just did. Ronan's smile was cold. Guards. 2 enforcers moved forward to flank Marcus. This is madness, Marcus shouted. The council won't stand for this. The pack won't. The pack, Ronan interrupted, will stand for justice. Even if you won't. As Marcus was dragged from the chamber, still protesting, Ronan turned to address the remaining council members. I am claiming Elara as my true mate, he said formally. Under sacred wolf law, this bond cannot be denied or dissolved. She will be recognized as my equal in all matters. And the Omega quarters will be dismantled immediately. Elder Catherine stood slowly. Alpha King. With respect. What you're proposing would fundamentally alter our pack structure. We need time to consider. There's nothing to consider, Ronan said flatly. This is not a request. It's a decree. You're overstepping your authority, another elder warned. Then remove me, Ronan challenged. Call for a vote of no confidence. Trigger a challenge for the crown. But understand this, I will not back down. Not on this. Not ever. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Elder James stood. I support the Alpha King, he said quietly. What we've allowed to happen in the Omega quarters is unconscionable. If this bond is real, and I believe it is, then perhaps the prophecy is meant to correct our failures. One by one, other elders stood in agreement. Not all of them, but enough. When the vote was called, it passed. Barely. 7-5. Ronan's decree would stand. Elara's legs nearly gave out with relief. Thank you, she whispered to Ronan. He looked down at her, his amber eyes soft. You did that, he said. You stood up to Marcus. You told the truth. You were incredible. Before Elara could respond, the chamber doors burst open again. An enforcer stumbled in, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. Alpha King, he gasped. We're under attack. The room went deathly still. What? Ronan demanded. The Ireclaw pack. They've breached the southern border. The enforcer swayed, nearly collapsing. They're claiming right of challenge. They want, he looked at Elara, his expression grim. They want the Omega. Time seemed to slow. The enforcer's words echoed through the council chamber like a death knell. They want the Omega. Elara's blood turned to ice. Explain, Ronan said, his voice deadly calm. But Elara could feel the fury rolling off him in waves, could see his hands curling into fists at his sides. The enforcer, his name was Nathan, Elara remembered seeing him in the Great Hall, struggled to stay upright. Blood soaked through his uniform, dripping onto the polished floor. The Ireclaw Alpha, Jareth Blackthorn, is at the border with maybe 50 warriors. Nathan's breathing was labored. He's invoking the old challenge law. Says he has rightful claim to the Omega called Elara. He swallowed hard. Says she was promised to his pack years ago. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's impossible, Elara whispered. I've never even met anyone from the Ireclaw pack. Silence her, Elder Catherine commanded sharply, standing from her seat. Alpha King, this changes everything. If the Ireclaw pack has legal claim. They don't, Ronan interrupted, his voice like ice. You don't know that, another elder argued. The old challenge laws are complex. If a contract was made, if promises were exchanged. I said they don't. Ronan's alpha authority flooded the room, pressing against every wolf until several of the elders dropped their gazes in submission. Elara is my true mate. That supersedes any contract, any promise, any claim. Under sacred wolf law, no one has the right to challenge that bond. Unless Elder Marcus's voice drifted from the doorway where the guards still held him, the bond was never completed. Unless she remains unclaimed. Ronan's head snapped toward Marcus with predatory focus. Marcus smiled, even as blood trickled from his lip where one of the guards had struck him. You gave a pretty speech about respecting her agency, Alpha King. About not forcing the claiming until she was ready. How noble. His eyes glittered with malice. How foolish. Understanding crashed over Elara like a physical blow. She was Ronan's mate, but unclaimed, unbonded, unmarked. Which meant, technically, she was still vulnerable to challenges. This is why you did it, Ronan said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. His gaze locked on Marcus with murderous intensity. You contacted the Ireclaw Pack. You told them about Elara. I did no such thing, Marcus said smoothly. Though I may have mentioned, in passing, to an old friend that the Alpha King had discovered an interesting Omega. One who seemed to have caught his attention. He shrugged. What Alpha Jareth chose to do with that information is entirely his business. You set this up, Theo breathed, moving forward from his position by the wall. You knew Ronan wouldn't force the claiming. You knew there'd be a window of vulnerability. So you manufactured a crisis. I simply shared information, Marcus corrected. As is my right as a council member. You're no longer a council member, Liam snarled. A technicality that Alpha Jareth may not recognize. Marcus's smile widened. Especially since my removal hasn't been formalized through proper channels. The trap was elegant. Brutal. Perfect. If Ronan had forced the claiming last night, if he'd marked Elara without her consent, the council could have used it against him. Could have claimed he was no better than Marcus, taking away Omega agency. But by respecting her choice, by giving her time, he'd left her vulnerable to exactly this kind of challenge. What does Jareth want? Ronan demanded, turning back to Nathan. The enforcer grimaced. He says there was a contract signed 20 years ago, before the Omega was born. A promise between the Ireclaw Pack and, he hesitated, looking at Elara with something like pity. Between Ireclaw and your parents, Elara. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. My parents. Elara's voice came out strangled. I don't understand. My parents died when I was a baby. I never knew them. Convenient, Elder Catherine murmured. Shut up, Ronan snapped at her before turning back to Nathan. What exactly is Jareth claiming? He says Elara's parents owed the Ireclaw Pack a blood debt. That in exchange for clearing that debt, they promised their firstborn daughter would be given to the Ireclaw Alpha as a mate when she came of age. Horror flooded through Elara. That can't be real. No parent would. Desperate people do desperate things, Marcus said softly. Your parents were rogues, Elara. Did you know that? Cast out from their original pack for crimes I'm sure you've never been told about. They came to Blackclaw territory seeking refuge, and we gave it to them. But not before they'd already made certain arrangements with other packs. You're lying, Elara said, but her voice shook. Am I? Marcus tilted his head. Ask yourself why you ended up in the Omega quarters instead of being raised as a normal pack member. Ask yourself why no one ever told you about your parents. Why their names were never spoken. Ronan moved to Elara's side, his hand finding hers. Whatever your parents did or didn't do doesn't matter. You're my mate. That's the only law that applies here. Not if the contract predates the bond, Elder Catherine said quietly. She didn't sound happy about it, just resigned. Alpha King, I understand your position. But the old challenge laws are absolute. If Jareth can produce proof of this contract, if he can show that Elara's parents made a binding promise, then what? Ronan's voice was dangerous. You expect me to just hand her over? I expect you to honor wolf law, Catherine replied. The same law you're using to protect her from Marcus. You can't pick and choose which traditions to follow. Watch me. The two words were a threat and a promise. Nathan cleared his throat weakly. Alpha King, there's more. Jareth says if you refuse to honor the contract, he'll consider it an act of war. He's already contacted 3 other packs, Silver Fang, Blood Moon, and Shadow Ridge. They've pledged to support his claim. Elara's heart sank. 4 packs against 1. Even with Blackclaw's strength, those were terrible odds. Let them come, Ronan said flatly. I'll destroy every single one. And lose how many of our own wolves in the process? Elder James asked gently. Alpha King, I supported your decree. I believe in your right to claim your mate. But we must consider the pack's survival. Starting a war over 1 Omega. She's not just 1 Omega, Ronan snarled. She's my mate. Then prove it. Marcus's voice cut through the tension. Complete the bond. Mark her. Claim her fully. Because right now, all you have is an incomplete connection that any alpha with a good lawyer could challenge in court. Ronan's entire body went rigid. Because Marcus was right. The mate bond was real. Elara could feel it thrumming between them, warm and constant. But it was incomplete. Unfulfilled. Vulnerable. We don't have time for the full claiming ritual, Theo said urgently. Jareth is at the border now. Even if Ronan marked her this second, Jareth could argue the contract still takes precedence because it predates their meeting. Then what do we do? Liam demanded. Silence fell over the chamber. Elara's mind raced. This was all her fault. If she'd just stayed invisible, if she'd never made that signal, none of this would be happening. Ronan wouldn't be facing war. The pack wouldn't be in danger. She was the problem. And there was only one solution. I'll go with him, Elara said quietly. Every head in the room snapped toward her. What? Ronan's voice was barely human. I'll go with Jareth. Honor the contract, if it's real. That way there's no war. No one has to die. She forced herself to look at Ronan, even though it felt like her heart was being ripped out. The pack will be safe. No, the word was absolute. Ronan. No, he repeated, moving to stand directly in front of her. His hands came up to frame her face, his touch desperate. You're not going anywhere. I don't care about contracts or blood debts or old challenge laws. You're mine, Elara. Mine. And I will burn this entire territory to ash before I let anyone take you. But the pack will follow me. Because I'm the Alpha King. And because what's happening to you is wrong. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. Your parents, if they really made this contract, had no right. You were a baby. You couldn't consent. And binding a child to a future they never chose is barbaric. But if it's legal, then we'll make it illegal, Ronan said fiercely. We'll change the laws. We'll rewrite every tradition that allows this kind of slavery. But we're not giving up. We're not surrendering. And you are not leaving me. Tears streamed down Elara's face. I don't want anyone to die for me. Then we make sure no one does. Ronan turned to address the council. I'm going to the border. I'm going to speak with Jareth directly. And I'm going to find a way to end this without bloodshed. And if you can't? Elder Catherine asked. Ronan's expression turned cold. Then there will be blood. But it won't be ours. He released Elara and strode toward the door, issuing commands as he moved. Liam, mobilize the guard. I want every warrior on high alert. Theo, contact our allied packs. Tell them we may need support. Nathan, he looked at the injured enforcer. Get to the medical bay. That's an order. Alpha King, Nathan said, swaying but determined, there's one more thing. Jareth brought something with him. A document. He says it's the original contract. Let me guess, Ronan said bitterly. Witnessed and sealed by Marcus. Nathan's silence was answer enough. Ronan's jaw clenched. Of course it is. He turned back to Marcus, who still stood flanked by guards. You planned this. All of it. The suppression of the mate bond, the timing of the revelation, the manufactured crisis. This was never about maintaining hierarchy. This was about destroying me. Marcus smiled. I have no idea what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Ronan moved closer, predatory and dangerous. Because 20 years ago, you knew about the prophecy. You knew that if I found my true mate among the Omegas, everything would change. So you made sure I wouldn't find her. You suppressed her bond. You kept her hidden in the Omega quarters where I'd never look. And yet you found her anyway, Marcus said softly. Funny how fate works. But you had a backup plan, Ronan continued. If the suppression ever failed, if I ever discovered the bond, you'd use this contract to take her away. To create a crisis that would force me to choose between my mate and my pack. You're being paranoid, Alpha King. Am I? Ronan's eyes blazed. Tell me something, Marcus. How did Jareth know about the contract? It was made 20 years ago, involving 2 dead rogues and an infant. How did he even know to look for it? Marcus said nothing. Unless someone told him, Ronan finished. Someone who'd been planning this for years. Someone who knew exactly when and how to deploy his final weapon. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture so horrifying Elara could barely process it. You killed them, she whispered. Marcus's gaze slid to her. Excuse me, my parents. Elara's voice grew stronger. You killed them. Because they wouldn't give me to you willingly, would they? They tried to back out of the contract. Don't be ridiculous. That's why I ended up in the Omega quarters instead of being placed with a foster family. That's why no one ever talked about them. You murdered them and made me disappear, thinking I'd be forgotten. Elara's hands clenched into fists. But you kept the contract. Just in case. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Triumph. Because even if Elara was right, even if she could prove it, there was no way to undo the contract. No way to invalidate Jareth's claim. The trap was perfect. We're wasting time, Ronan said abruptly. He turned to Elara. You're coming with me to the border. I want you where I can see you, where I can protect you. Is that wise? Elder Catherine asked. If Jareth sees her. I want him to see her, Ronan said coldly. I want him to see exactly what he's trying to claim. I want him to look into her eyes and understand that if he takes her, he's starting a war he cannot win. The authority in his voice was absolute. Undeniable. The council members exchanged glances, but didn't argue. Let's go, Ronan said, holding out his hand to Elara once more. She took it without hesitation. Together, they strode from the council chamber, leaving Marcus and his conspiracies behind. But as they moved through the corridors toward the southern border, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into another trap. One that might not have an escape. The southern border was a 20-minute drive through dense forest. They took 3 vehicles, Ronan and Elara in the lead car with Theo driving, followed by 2 SUVs full of elite warriors. The silence in the car was heavy. Elara stared out the window, watching trees blur past, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Powerless. Trapped. Now she was at the center of a potential war. Elara. Ronan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find him watching her, his amber eyes intense. Whatever happens at this border meeting, he said quietly, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? I trust you, she said immediately. Even if I have to make choices you don't like? Even if I have to do things that seem wrong in the moment? Elara studied his face, searching for clues about what he was planning. What are you going to do? Whatever it takes, Ronan said simply. To keep you safe. To keep the pack safe. To end this. His hand found hers again, squeezing gently. But I need to know you're with me. Completely. I am, Elara said. And meant it. Whatever doubts she'd had, whatever fears still lingered, they paled in comparison to the certainty she felt when she looked at him. This was her mate. Her partner. Her home. Ronan's expression softened with relief. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was tender. intimate, and absolutely terrifying because it felt like goodbye. Ronan, we're here, Theo announced from the driver's seat. The car rolled to a stop at a clearing near the border markers, ancient stone pillars carved with territorial symbols. On the far side of the clearing stood a group of wolves. 50, Nathan had said. It looked like more. They were arranged in military formation, all of them wearing the dark green and black colors of the Ireclaw pack. At their center stood a man who could only be Alpha Jareth Blackthorn. He was tall, nearly as tall as Ronan, with shoulder-length black hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Handsome, in a brutal sort of way. He wore combat gear and confidence like a second skin. And when his gaze landed on the car, on Elara visible through the window, he smiled. Stay close, Ronan murmured. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And no matter what Jareth says, don't believe him. Okay, Elara whispered. They exited the vehicle. Ronan's warriors fanned out in a protective semicircle, hands on weapons, ready for violence. Jareth's smile widened. Ronan Blackclaw. It's been a long time. Not long enough, Ronan said coldly. You're trespassing, Jareth. Leave now and I'll forget this insult to my territory. I'm not trespassing. I'm collecting what's mine. Jareth's gaze slid past Ronan to fix on Elara. Hello, little Omega. Do you know who I am? Elara's wolf recoiled from the possessiveness in his voice. No. No, what? Jareth's tone sharpened. She doesn't have to address you with respect, Ronan said flatly. You're not her alpha. Not yet. Jareth pulled a document from his jacket, aged paper, yellowed with time, covered in formal writing and official seals. But I will be. This is a binding contract, signed by Elara's parents 20 years ago. They promised their daughter to me in exchange for clearing a blood debt of $300,000. 300,000, Theo breathed. For rogues? What did they do? Stole from the Silver Fong Pack's treasury, Jareth explained casually. Would have been executed for it, but I offered them a deal. Clear the debt, give me their daughter, and they could live. He shrugged. They took the deal. And then they died mysteriously a year later, Ronan said. How convenient. Tragic, really, Jareth agreed without a hint of remorse. But the contract remains valid. I've waited 20 years for this girl to come of age. I'm not leaving without her. She's my mate, Ronan said, his voice dropping to a growl. So you claim. Jareth tilted his head. But I don't see a mark. I don't smell a completed bond. All I see is an alpha who's gotten possessive over a pretty omega. He took a step forward. The contract predates your meeting. Under old challenge law, my claim takes precedence. That law was abolished 50 years ago. Actually, Jareth said, pulling out another document, it was suspended. Not abolished. And I filed a petition with the High Council to reinstate it for this specific case. They've granted a temporary ruling in my favor pending a full hearing. Ronan's hands clenched into fists. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. Jareth's storm-gray eyes glittered. The High Council agrees that promises made in good faith should be honored. Your mate bond, if it exists, formed after the contract. Therefore, the contract takes precedence. This is insane, Liam muttered. This is law, Jareth corrected. Now, Ronan. You can hand over the Omega peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. The clearing went deathly silent. Elara could feel the violence simmering just beneath the surface, could see Ronan's warriors preparing for battle. Tell me something, Ronan said quietly. Did Marcus contact you directly? Or did he use an intermediary? Jareth's expression flickered with surprise. Marcus? I haven't spoken to that old bastard in years. Liar. I don't need to lie, Jareth said. I have the law on my side. I have 4 allied packs ready to support my claim. And I have patience. He smiled again, cold and calculating. You, on the other hand, have an incomplete bond and a pack that's already questioning your judgment. How long do you think you can hold out against a siege? As long as it takes, Ronan said. Even if it means watching your wolves die one by one? Jareth's voice turned mocking. Even if it means destroying your territory over one Omega you've known for less than a day? She's my mate, Ronan snarled. Then prove it. Jareth spread his hands. Complete the bond. Mark her right here, right now. Show me, show everyone, that the connection is real and permanent. It was a trap. Elara could see it clearly. If Ronan marked her now, under duress, it would look like coercion. Like he was forcing the bond to invalidate the contract. And if he didn't mark her, Jareth would use that hesitation as proof that the bond wasn't real. I don't have to prove anything to you, Ronan said. No, Jareth agreed. But you do have to prove it to the High Council. And they've given me authority to collect the Omega pending their final ruling. He pulled yet another document from his jacket. This is a writ of temporary custody. Signed by 3 members of the High Council this morning. Ronan snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it rapidly. His expression grew darker with every line. This is illegal, he said finally. It's temporary, Jareth corrected. The High Council will make a final determination within 30 days. Until then, Elara comes with me. Over my dead body. That, Jareth said softly, can be arranged. The Ironclaw warriors moved forward as one, weapons appearing in their hands. Ronan's warriors responded in kind, the clearing suddenly bristling with lethal intent. Last chance, Ronan, Jareth said. Hand her over peacefully. No bloodshed. No war. Just compliance with High Council law. Ronan looked at Elara, his amber eyes filled with pain and fury and desperate calculation. And then he did something Elara never expected. He stepped aside. Take her, he said flatly. Oh no, he didn't. If you're screaming at your screen right now, drop a comment with "Don't you dare." Because we're all feeling that betrayal, that shock, that absolute what is happening moment. Elara's heart stopped. What? She whispered. You heard me, Ronan said, his voice cold. I'm not starting a war over a contract dispute. The High Council has ruled. I'll respect their decision. Ronan, Theo started. Stand down, Ronan ordered. All of you. Let them take her. Elara couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. He was giving her up. After everything, after the promises, after the mate bond, after swearing he'd burn the kingdom down before letting her go, he was just surrendering. Jareth looked as surprised as everyone else. Well, he said slowly. That was easier than expected. Take her and leave my territory, Ronan said. And if you harm one hair on her head before the High Council makes their final ruling, I will declare war. Regardless of the political consequences. Fair enough. Jareth gestured, and 2 of his warriors moved forward to flank Elara. She stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. Elara, Ronan said, finally looking at her. Go with them. The coldness in his voice shattered something inside her. You promised, she whispered. You promised you'd protect me. Something flickered in Ronan's eyes, pain, regret, something that looked almost like agony. But his voice remained cold. Plans change. I have to think about the pack. The words were a knife to the heart. Elara felt tears streaming down her face, felt her wolf howling with betrayal, felt everything she'd dared to hope for crumbling to ash. I understand, she managed, her voice breaking. She didn't resist when Jareth's warriors took her arms. Didn't fight when they led her across the clearing toward Jareth's vehicle. She just walked. Numb. Broken. Alone. She'd been stupid to trust. Stupid to hope. Stupid to believe that someone like her could ever matter to someone like Ronan. As they reached the tree line, Jareth leaned down to whisper in her ear. Don't look so heartbroken, little Omega. I'll take much better care of you than he ever would. Elara said nothing, but in her mind, her wolf was screaming. Screaming and screaming and screaming. The Ironclaw territory was nothing like Blackclaw. Where Ronan's estate had been stone and shadow and unexpected warmth, Jareth's compound was all cold steel and harsh angles. Everything was designed for intimidation, high walls topped with barbed wire, guard towers at every corner, searchlights that swept the grounds in mechanical patterns. It looked less like a pack house and more like a prison. Elara sat in the back of the SUV, wedged between two silent warriors who hadn't spoken a word during the 3-hour drive. Jareth sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her with an expression she couldn't read. Satisfaction, maybe. Or calculation. She'd stopped crying an hour ago. Now she just felt hollow. I have to think about the pack. Ronan's words echoed in her mind on an endless loop, each repetition carving deeper into her heart. He'd given her up. Without a fight. Without hesitation. Everything he'd said about the mate bond, about protecting her, about changing the world, it had all been lies. Pretty words meant to manipulate her, to make her compliant. Just like Marcus had said. Elara closed her eyes, fighting back a fresh wave of despair. The vehicle rolled through the compound gates and stopped in front of a massive building constructed of dark metal and tinted glass. Warriors lined the entrance, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Out, Jareth ordered. Elara climbed from the SUV on shaking legs. The moment her feet hit the ground, she felt wrongness settle over her like a physical weight. This place didn't just feel unwelcoming, it felt hostile. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. Jareth moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell him, metal and ozone, and something bitter that made her wolf recoil. "Welcome home," he said softly. "This isn't my home," Elara managed. "It will be." Jareth's hand closed around her upper arm, his grip just tight enough to hurt. "Come. I'll show you to your quarters." He led her into the building, through corridors lined with more warriors, more watchful eyes. They descended a staircase, down into the lower levels where the air grew colder and the walls pressed in claustrophobically. Finally, Jareth stopped in front of a heavy metal door. "These will be your rooms until the High Council makes their final ruling," he said, producing a keycard. The lock beeped, and the door swung open. The space beyond was small but not uncomfortable. A bed, a desk, a private bathroom. Windows near the ceiling let in weak natural light. But the windows had bars. And the door locked from the outside. "I'm a prisoner," Elara said flatly. "You're a guest," Jareth corrected. "One with certain restrictions, for your own safety." "My safety?" "Of course." Jareth smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The Black Claw Pack might try to reclaim you. Ronan might change his mind about respecting High Council authority. I'm simply taking precautions." Elara stepped into the room because she had no choice. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the door close behind her with a decisive click. "Someone will bring you dinner in a few hours," Jareth called through the door. "I suggest you rest. Tomorrow, we have much to discuss." His footsteps retreated down the corridor, leaving Elara alone. She stood in the center of the room for a long moment, unable to move, unable to think beyond the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. Then, slowly, she walked to the bed and sat down. And finally, she let herself break. Sobs tore from her throat, harsh and ugly and raw. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sounds, but they kept coming. Waves of grief and terror and loss crashed over her until she couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but shake apart. 20 years of survival instinct had taught her to stay quiet, to hide her pain, to never show weakness. But there was no one here to see, no one who cared. So she wept. For the brief, beautiful moment when she'd thought she mattered. When she'd believed the mate bond was real, that Ronan's promises meant something, that she might actually have a future worth living. For the hope that had bloomed in her chest when Ronan had called her extraordinary. For the way his hands had felt cupping her face, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. All of it had been a lie. Time passed. She didn't know how much. The weak light from the windows gradually faded to darkness. Eventually, her tears ran dry. She sat on the bed, hollow and exhausted, staring at nothing. A knock on the door made her flinch. "Dinner," a female voice called. The door opened partway, and a tray was pushed through before the door closed again. Locked again. Elara didn't move to look at the food. She couldn't imagine eating. Her wolf, which had been so vibrant, so alive when the mate bond snapped into place, had retreated deep into her consciousness. Not gone, but distant. Wounded. "Mate rejected us," her wolf whispered. "Abandoned us." "I know," Elara said aloud to the empty room. She lay down on the bed, curling into herself, and closed her eyes. Sleep came eventually, though it was fitful and full of nightmares. Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent lights suddenly flooding the room. Elara jerked awake, disoriented, her heart racing. Jareth stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. He looked immaculate, freshly showered, dressed in expensive clothes, every hair in place. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I trust you slept well?" Elara said nothing. "Not talkative today? That's all right. You'll find your voice eventually." He gestured. "Come. We have things to discuss." The guards moved forward, clearly prepared to force her if necessary. Elara stood on her own. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of dragging her. They led her through more corridors, up several flights of stairs, until they reached what appeared to be Jareth's private office. It was large and coldly elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the compound. "Sit," Jareth said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Elara sat. Jareth settled into his own chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "You look terrible," he observed. "Crying all night, I assume?" She didn't respond. "Understandable. Betrayal is painful." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "But you should know Ronan didn't have a choice." "Not really." Despite herself, Elara's attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" There's that voice." Jareth smiled. "What I mean is that the High Council didn't just grant me temporary custody out of respect for old contracts. They granted it because they received concerning information about the Black Claw Pack." "What information?" "Evidence of Alpha tyranny. Of Ronan overstepping his authority, dissolving council positions without proper cause, making radical changes to pack hierarchy based solely on personal attachment to an Omega." Jareth's smile widened. "The High Council doesn't look kindly on alphas who let emotion override duty." Understanding crashed over Elara like ice water. "You framed him," she whispered. "You made it look like he was being irrational. Unstable." "I presented facts," Jareth corrected. "Ronan did dissolve Marcus's position. He did make sweeping changes to Omega management. He did threaten war over one girl." He shrugged. "I simply highlighted how those actions appear to an outside observer. Concerning, don't you think? You manipulated the situation." "I created leverage," Jareth said. "The High Council gave Ronan a choice: hand you over peacefully and undergo a leadership review, or refuse and be stripped of his title for gross misconduct. He chose his pack over you, as any good alpha should." The words hit like physical blows. Ronan hadn't betrayed her because he didn't care. He'd betrayed her because Jareth had engineered a scenario where protecting her meant losing everything. His crown. His pack. His entire life's work. "You're a monster," Elara said quietly. "I'm practical," Jareth corrected. "And patient. I've been working toward this for 20 years, Elara. Ever since I made that contract with your parents." "Why?" Elara demanded. "Why go to all this trouble? I'm just an Omega. There are thousands of Omegas across the territories. Why me?" Jareth's expression shifted into something that looked almost like hunger. "Because you're not just an Omega," he said softly. "You're a silenced Omega. The one from the prophecy." Elara's blood ran cold. "How did you know about the prophecy?" "Please. Every alpha with access to the old archives knows about it. Most dismissed it as legend. But he leaned forward. "I believed. And I spent years researching, tracking bloodlines, looking for the Omega who would fulfill it. And you found me." "Your parents found me," Jareth corrected. "They were desperate, drowning in debt, facing execution. When they came to me begging for help, I saw an opportunity. I paid their debt and made them sign the contract. And then I waited. Until I came of age, Elara finished, feeling sick. Until you came of age, Jareth agreed. But there was a complication. You see, I wasn't the only one who knew about the prophecy. Marcus knew too. And he realized that if Ronan found his true mate among the Omegas, it would trigger the prophecy, and Marcus would lose his power. So he suppressed my bond, Elara said. Made sure Ronan and I would never recognize each other. Exactly. Marcus and I have been playing a long game against each other, both of us trying to control you, to use you for our own purposes. Jareth smiled. But I won. Marcus is in chains. Ronan is under High Council review. And you're here with me, where you were always meant to be. I'm Ronan's mate, Elara said, her voice shaking. The bond is real. You can't change that. Can't I? Jareth stood and moved around the desk to lean against it, towering over her. Bonds can be broken, Elara. Especially incomplete ones. With the right magic, the right pressure, the right persuasion. I can make you forget Ronan Blacklaw ever existed. Horror flooded through her. You can't, that's forbidden. So are suppression collars, Jareth said mildly. And yet Marcus used them for years. Powerful wolves break rules all the time, Elara. The trick is not getting caught. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Elara flinched away from his touch, but there was nowhere to go. Here's what's going to happen, Jareth said conversationally. You're going to stay here for 30 days while the High Council deliberates. During that time, you're going to learn what it means to be my Omega. You'll learn to obey, to submit, to accept your place at my side. Never, Elara spat. Oh, you will, Jareth said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Because if you don't, if you resist, if you try to escape, if you refuse to cooperate, I will make sure the High Council rules against Ronan. I'll present evidence of his instability. I'll argue that his attachment to you proves he's unfit to lead. And they'll strip him of his crown. He leaned closer until his face was inches from hers. But if you do cooperate, he continued softly, if you accept the bond-breaking ritual, if you stand before the High Council and declare that you choose me over him, then I'll drop all charges. Ronan keeps his crown. His pack stays intact. Everyone lives happily ever after. The trap was perfect. Elegant. Impossible. You're asking me to destroy my mate bond, Elara whispered. To give up my soul. I'm asking you to save Ronan's life, Jareth corrected. Because make no mistake, if he loses his crown, the council won't just exile him. They'll see him as a threat. A rogue alpha with nothing to lose. And rogues are executed on sight. His eyes glittered. So, yes, you'll lose your mate bond. But he'll live. And isn't that worth any sacrifice? Elara couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Because Jareth was right. If she refused, if she fought this, Ronan would lose everything. He'd be stripped of his title, hunted down, killed. But if she cooperated, if she let Jareth break the bond, she'd lose the only person who'd ever made her feel like she mattered. I need time, she managed. You have 24 hours, Jareth said. After that, I start filing formal complaints with the High Council. He straightened and moved back toward his desk. The guards will return you to your room. I suggest you use the time to think carefully about your choice. The guards stepped forward and hauled Elara to her feet. She didn't resist. What was the point? Back in her cell, because that's what it was, really, regardless of Jareth's pretty words, Elara sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the impossible situation she'd been trapped in. Save Ronan by destroying herself. Or save herself and watch Ronan die. There was no third option. No clever escape. No miraculous rescue. Her wolf stirred weakly in her consciousness. Mate will come, she whispered. Mate will save us. But Elara knew better. Ronan had made his choice at the border. He'd chosen his pack over her, his duty over the mate bond. She couldn't blame him. It was the logical choice. The right choice. One Omega wasn't worth a kingdom. But gods, it hurt. It hurt so much she could barely stand it. Hours passed. The light from the window shifted as the sun moved across the sky. Evening came. Dinner was delivered, another tray pushed through the door. Elara ignored it. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spiraling through every possible scenario and finding no solution, no hope, no way out. This is how it ends, she thought distantly. This is how I disappear. Just like Maya and Charlotte and all the others. Not killed. Just erased. The mate bond in her chest ached like a physical wound, still present but growing fainter by the hour. As if sensing its impending destruction. I'm sorry, she thought, directing the words toward Ronan even though he'd never hear them. I'm sorry I wasn't worth fighting for. Darkness fell outside. The compound grew quiet. Elara closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her toward restless sleep. And then, crack. The sound was sharp and sudden, like breaking stone. Elara's eyes flew open. Another crack, louder this time, followed by shouting in the distance. An alarm began blaring, its harsh wail cutting through the night. Elara scrambled off the bed and moved to the window, pressing her face against the bars to see out. The compound was in chaos. Warriors running in every direction. Searchlights sweeping frantically. And in the distance, near the main gates, fire. Massive, roaring flames that lit up the night sky. Something exploded, the sound so loud it rattled the windows. More shouting. More running. And then, through the chaos, through the smoke and flame and confusion, a howl. Deep and primal and achingly familiar. Elara's breath caught. Ronan. Another howl answered the first, then another, until the night was filled with the sound of wolves singing their battle cry. The Black Claw Pack had come. And they'd come for war. Elara's heart, which had been hollow and broken, suddenly surged with desperate, impossible hope. He came back, her wolf whispered, suddenly vibrant again. Mate came for us. He came back, Elara repeated, tears streaming down her face. The door to her cell burst open. She whirled, expecting guards. Instead, she found Liam, covered in soot and blood, his eyes wild with urgency. Come on, he said, grabbing her hand. We're getting you out of here. Liam, how? Questions later. Running now. He pulled her into the corridor, where Theo waited with 3 other Blackclaw warriors. Is she hurt? Theo asked urgently. I'm fine, Elara managed. What's happening? Ronan's tearing down the front gates, Liam said as they ran through the corridors. We came in through the eastern wall. Classic distraction and extraction. But Jareth said, the High Council, if Ronan attacks, he'll lose his crown. Yeah, well, Theo said with a fierce grin. Ronan's exact words were, fuck the crown. They burst through a side exit into the compound grounds. The chaos was worse out here, wolves fighting in both human and shifted forms, fire spreading across buildings, the air thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. This way, Liam shouted, leading them toward a breach in the eastern wall. They were 20 feet from freedom when warriors dropped from the walls above, cutting off their escape. Ironclaw warriors. At least a dozen of them. Liam and Theo immediately shifted into defensive positions, their own warriors flanking Elara protectively. Well, a cold voice said. Jareth emerged from the smoke, still immaculate despite the destruction around him. An extraction team. How romantic. His eyes fixed on Elara. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this? Let her go, Liam growled. No, I don't think I will. Jareth gestured and his warriors moved forward. You see, Ronan made a critical error. By attacking my territory, by defying High Council authority, he's proven everything I told them. He's unstable, dangerous, unfit to lead. He's protecting his mate, Theo snarled. He's starting a war over an Omega, Jareth corrected. And when the High Council hears about this, and they will, they'll have no choice but to remove him. He smiled. Elara stays with me. You can tell Ronan he's just destroyed himself for nothing. Over my dead body, Liam said. That, Jareth replied, can be arranged. His warriors attacked. The clearing erupted into violence, claws and teeth and blood. Liam and Theo fought with desperate ferocity, trying to protect Elara, trying to clear a path to the wall. But there were too many. Elara watched in horror as one of their warriors went down, then another. They were losing. And then, a roar split the night. Massive and primal and filled with such raw fury that every wolf in the clearing froze. From the smoke and fire, a huge black wolf emerged. Ronan. Even in wolf form, he was unmistakable, bigger than any wolf Elara had ever seen, his fur dark as midnight, his eyes blazing amber gold. He looked at Elara, and the mate bond in her chest screamed. Mate, her wolf sang. Mate. Ronan's gaze shifted to Jareth, and he lunged. The two alphas collided with bone-crushing force, rolling across the ground in a tangle of fur and fangs. Jareth shifted mid-roll, matching Ronan's wolf form with his own, slightly smaller, but no less deadly, his fur a pale gray that seemed to glow in the firelight. They fought with the savagery of apex predators, each trying to tear out the other's throat. Go! Theo shouted at Elara. Get to the wall. Now! But Elara couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from the battle. Ronan was powerful, but Jareth was fast. Every time Ronan seemed to gain the advantage, Jareth would slip away, would land a counterattack that drew blood. They were too evenly matched. This could go on for hours. And eventually, one of them would die. Elara's mind raced. She had to do something. Had to help somehow. But what could an Omega possibly do against two alpha wolves locked in mortal combat? And then she remembered. The signal. The ancient Omega signal that had started all of this. But there was another signal. One she'd only heard about in whispered stories, never actually seen used. A signal that meant I claim my mate. It was risky. Possibly fatal. Because claiming a mate during an active challenge was seen as interference, and interference during alpha combat was punishable by death. But if she did nothing, Ronan would die. Or Jareth would die, and Ronan would lose his crown anyway for killing another alpha over a contract dispute. There was no good choice. Only impossible ones. Elara took a breath, and stepped forward into the space between the battling wolves. Stop, she screamed. Time seemed to fracture. Elara stood in the space between two alpha wolves locked in mortal combat, her arms outstretched, her voice still echoing across the compound. Stop. Both wolves skidded to a halt, mere inches from her body. Ronan's massive black form was on her left, his amber eyes wide with shock and horror. Jareth's pale gray wolf circled to her right, his lips pulled back in a snarl that showed every gleaming fang. The clearing had gone deathly silent. Every warrior, Blackclaw and Ireclaw alike, stood frozen, staring at the Omega who'd just done the impossible. Who'd just stepped between two alphas. Elara. Theo breathed from somewhere behind her. What are you doing? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because her hands were moving of their own accord, rising to press against her heart in an ancient gesture she'd only read about in forbidden texts hidden in the Omega quarters. The claiming signal. Her fingers spread across her chest, then moved outward in a sweeping motion that encompassed both wolves. I claim my mate. I choose my bond. I accept my destiny. The words were never spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. The gesture said everything. Ronan shifted instantly, returning to human form. He stood before her, naked and covered in blood and ash, his eyes blazing with emotion so intense it stole her breath. Elara, he said, his voice rough. You can't, this isn't. I know what I'm doing, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Jareth shifted as well, his storm gray eyes fixed on her with an expression caught between fury and fascination. Clever little Omega, he said softly. You're invoking the old claiming right. Do you even understand what that means? It means I choose, Elara said, her chin lifting. Under the old laws, an Omega has the right to claim her mate during a challenge, to stop the combat and declare her choice. And you choose Ronan, Jareth said flatly. Yes. Even though it means I'll bring this before the High Council? Even though it means Ronan will lose his crown? Even then. Jareth's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. I could give you everything, power, status, protection. What can he give you? A deposed alpha? A rogue with a target on his back. He gives me choice, Elara said quietly. He gives me freedom. He gives me a voice. She looked at Ronan, at the man who'd turned his world upside down to protect her. He gives me love. The word hung in the air like a bell tone. Ronan's expression cracked, raw emotion flooding his face. Elara. I'm not finished, she said, turning back to Jareth. You want to invoke old laws? Fine. Let's invoke all of them. She took a breath. Under the old claiming right, if an Omega publicly claims her mate during a challenge, the challenge is nullified. The contract becomes void. And any Alpha who continues to pursue her is considered a violator of sacred bond law. Jareth's eyes narrowed. That law hasn't been enforced in over a century. But it still exists, came a new voice. Everyone turned. Elder James walked through the smoke and chaos, flanked by 3 other council members, including, impossibly, Elder Catherine. They looked exhausted, covered in travel dust, but very much present. Elder James, Ronan said, confusion and hope warring in his voice. What are you doing here? Stopping a catastrophe, James said dryly. He moved to stand between the 2 groups of warriors, his gaze sweeping across the destruction. When you left Blackclaw territory at dawn, Alpha King, several of us became concerned. So we did some investigating. Into what? Jareth demanded. Into the contract, Elder Catherine said, pulling a folder from her bag. The one you claim gives you rights to Elara. We accessed the original documents from the territorial archives. Her expression was grim. And we found some very interesting discrepancies. Elara's heart began to race. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that suggest forgery, James said bluntly. He turned to Jareth. The contract you presented to the High Council was dated 20 years ago, yes? Yes, Jareth said carefully. And signed by Elara's parents, witnessed by Elder Marcus, sealed with official pack marks? Correct. Except, Catherine said, opening the folder, the official seal on your document doesn't match the seal that was in use 20 years ago. The Blackclaw Pack changed their territorial seal 18 years ago, after Elara's parents died. Which means this contract was created after their deaths. The words dropped like bombs. Silence rippled through the clearing. That's impossible, Jareth said, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. Or perhaps calculation. We also tracked down records of the original debt, James continued. The one Elara's parents supposedly owed to the Silverfang Pack. It existed, that part is true. But the debt was cleared through standard payment plans. There's no record of any contract involving their daughter. You're lying, Jareth said flatly. We have documentation, Catherine replied. Official records from 3 different territorial archives. All of them contradicting your claims. She looked at Jareth with something like pity. Someone fed you false information, Alpha Jareth. Someone created this contract and convinced you it was real. Marcus, Ronan said quietly. Understanding dawned on his face. Marcus created the contract. He knew about the prophecy, knew I would eventually find Elara. So he created a backup plan, a forged contract that would let him control the situation if the suppression ever failed. But why involve Jareth? Theo asked. Because Jareth was convenient, Elara said, the pieces falling into place in her mind. Young, ambitious, desperate to prove himself. Marcus approached him 20 years ago with a legitimate contract, convinced him to wait for me to come of age. And Jareth believed him because why wouldn't he? Marcus was a respected elder. So Marcus played us both, Jareth said slowly. His expression had gone from fury to something colder. More dangerous. He used me as a weapon against Ronan. Made me think I had legal claim to the Omega, knowing it would force a confrontation. And when that confrontation happened, Ronan finished, Marcus could watch from the sidelines while we destroyed each other. Either I'd lose my crown trying to protect Elara, or you'd die in combat and Marcus would still have leverage to use against me. That manipulative bastard, Jareth breathed. Indeed, James said. Which is why, when we discovered the forgery, we immediately contacted the High Council. They've revoked the temporary custody order and issued a warrant for Marcus's arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of elder authority. Hope bloomed in Elara's chest, so fierce and sudden it was almost painful. So the contract is invalid? Completely, Catherine confirmed. You have no legal obligation to Alpha Jareth. Never did. Elara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ronan moved instantly, catching her before she could fall, pulling her against his chest. His arms came around her, solid and warm and safe. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you, love. You're safe now. Love. He'd called her love. Elara pressed her face into his chest and finally, let herself believe it might actually be true. What about the attack? Jareth asked, his voice tight. Ronan still violated my territory, destroyed my compound, injured my warriors. In pursuit of recovering his kidnapped mate, James said pointedly, you held her against her while based on fraudulent documentation. Under pack law, Ronan had every right to extract her by force. She wasn't kidnapped, she came willingly. Because you threatened Ronan's crown if she didn't, Elder Catherine interrupted. We have testimony from several witnesses who heard you make those threats. You used coercion to gain custody of an Omega who wasn't yours to claim. Her expression hardened. Be grateful we're not bringing charges against you, Alpha Jareth. Jareth's jaw clenched. For a long moment, he looked like he might argue further. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. I was played, he said quietly. Used as a pawn in Marcus's game. He looked at Elara, and something almost like regret flickered in his storm gray eyes. I genuinely believed the contract was real. I thought I was claiming what was rightfully mine. I never meant to, he stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I meant. The outcome is the same. You could have killed her, Ronan said, his voice deadly soft. You locked her in a cell. You threatened to break her bond. You. I know, Jareth interrupted. And for what it's worth. I'm sorry. The apology seemed to cost him. Ronan stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Your compound is destroyed. Your pack needs rebuilding. We'll call it even. Generous of you, Jareth said dryly. I'm feeling generous, Ronan replied. My mate is safe. Marcus is going to rot in a cell for the rest of his miserable life. And I still have my crown. He looked down at Elara, his expression softening. Everything else is just details. About that crown, Elder James said carefully. There's still the matter of the High Council review. Your actions tonight, attacking another pack's territory, defying custody orders, starting what could have been a war, those don't just disappear because the contract was fake. Ronan's expression hardened. I did what I had to do. We know, Catherine said. And privately, many of us agree with your choices. But publicly, the High Council needs to save face. They issued that custody order in good faith. They need to show that there are consequences for defying their authority, even when you're in the right. So what are you saying? Theo asked tensely. We're saying there will be a formal hearing, James explained. You'll present your case, we'll present ours, and the High Council will make a ruling. But, he smiled slightly. Given the evidence of Marcus's conspiracy, given the invalid contract, and given that Elara has now publicly claimed you using the old claiming right, which, by the way, hasn't been invoked in nearly 200 years, I'd say your chances of keeping your crown are excellent. How excellent? Liam asked. Let's just say I wouldn't bet against the Alpha King, Catherine said. Relief flooded through the clearing. Ronan's warriors exchanged grins. Even Theo allowed himself a small smile. When is this hearing? Ronan asked. 3 days, James said. Which gives you time to complete the mate bond properly, present Elara as your official mate and future Luna, and prepare your defense. Ronan looked down at Elara, his amber eyes searching hers. Is that what you want? To complete the bond? To be my Luna? The question was asked quietly, privately, as if they weren't standing in the middle of a destroyed compound surrounded by dozens of witnesses. As if the only answer that mattered was hers. Elara thought about everything that had happened. The signal in the Great Hall. The Omega Quarters. The mate bond snapping into place. Jareth's cell and Marcus's conspiracies, and the moment at the border when she'd thought Ronan had abandoned her. She thought about Ronan coming back. About him defying the High Council, attacking an enemy compound, risking everything to save her. About him calling her love. Yes, she said simply. That's what I want. Ronan's face transformed, relief and joy and something fierce and possessive flooding his features. Then we go home, he said. We complete the bond. And we show the High Council exactly what happens when you try to separate true mates. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, holding her against his chest. Thank you, he said to James and Catherine. For investigating. For coming here. For believing in us. Thank you for not getting yourself killed, James replied dryly. That would have been very inconvenient politically. Ronan laughed. Actually laughed, and the sound was warm and real and beautiful. As he carried Elara toward the breach in the wall, toward freedom, she looked back one last time at Jareth. The Ireclaw Alpha stood alone among the ruins of his compound, watching them leave. He didn't look angry anymore. Just tired. He's not a bad person, Elara said quietly. He was just manipulated. I know, Ronan said. But he still hurt you. And I'm having a hard time forgiving that. You don't have to forgive him, Elara said. But maybe, eventually, you could understand him. He thought he was claiming his mate. He thought he had legitimate rights. He was wrong, but his intentions weren't purely evil. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then, you're too generous. Too forgiving. No, Elara said. I'm just tired of hate. Tired of vengeance. Tired of wolves hurting each other because of old laws and older grudges. She looked up at him. I want to build something better. Don't you? Ronan's expression softened with something that looked like wonder. Yes, he said quietly. Yes, I do. They passed through the breach in the wall. On the other side, the Black Claw Pack had assembled warriors, healers, support staff. All of them waiting for their alpha. When they saw Ronan carrying Elara, a cheer went up. Not because they'd won a battle, but because their alpha had found his mate and brought her home. The drive back to Black Claw territory took 3 hours. Elara spent most of it pressed against Ronan's side in the back of the SUV, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest. They didn't talk much. There would be time for words later. For now, they just existed together. Safe. Whole. Home. When they finally arrived at the Black Claw estate, dawn was breaking over the northern forest, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ronan carried Elara inside, past the wolves who'd gathered to welcome them back, through the corridors she was beginning to recognize, until they reached his private chambers. He set her down gently, carefully, as if she might break. Are you okay? He asked, his hands framing her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Did Jareth hurt you? Did anyone? I'm okay, Elara interrupted softly. Scared, but okay. He didn't. He threatened, but he didn't actually hurt me. Ronan's eyes closed briefly with relief. When I had to let you go at the border, when I watched them take you away, his voice cracked. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew Jareth would be watching. If I'd fought then, he would have escalated immediately. So I waited. I planned. And I came for you the moment I had a strategy that might actually work. You let me think you'd abandoned me, Elara said. You let me believe the mate bond didn't matter to you. I know. Ronan's expression filled with anguish. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, wanted to explain, but there were too many eyes watching, too many ears listening. If Jareth had suspected I was planning a rescue, he stopped, shook his head. I made you suffer to protect you. And I'll spend the rest of my life making that up to you. You came back, Elara said simply. You risked everything to save me. That's all that matters. Not everything, Ronan corrected. You matter. The mate bond matters. Us. He pulled her closer. We matter more than crowns or councils or anything else. The hearing. We'll handle it, Ronan said. Together. But first, his expression shifted into something heated. Something hungry. First, we complete the bond. Elara's breath caught. Now, if you're ready, Ronan said carefully. I won't rush you. I won't force anything. But Elara, his voice dropped to something raw. I've been waiting my entire life for you. And now that I have you, now that you're safe and here and mine, I don't want to wait anymore. Neither did she. The realization hit her with crystal clarity. She'd spent 20 years being invisible, being powerless, being nothing. No more. I'm ready, Elara said. And she was. Ready to claim her mate. Ready to complete the bond. Ready to step into the future she'd never dared to dream of. Ronan's eyes flared amber gold. Are you sure? Yes. Once we do this, there's no going back. The bond will be permanent. Unbreakable. You'll be bound to me for the rest of your life. I know, Elara said. And I choose it. I choose you. The words were barely out of her mouth before Ronan was kissing her. It wasn't gentle. Wasn't soft or tentative or careful. It was fire and desperation and need, all the fear and rage and relief of the last 2 days pouring into a single point of connection. Elara kissed him back with everything she had, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressing against his as if she could merge them into one being. The mate bond in her chest roared to life, no longer faint or wounded, but blazing like the sun. Mate, her wolf sang. Home. Ours. Ronan walked her backward toward the bed, never breaking the kiss, his hands sliding down her sides to her hips. Tell me if you want to stop, he murmured against her lips. Tell me if it's too much. Don't stop, Elara breathed. Don't ever stop. That was all the permission he needed. The claiming was everything the stories said it would be, and nothing like them at all. It was physical, yes. Bodies coming together, pleasure building until it was almost unbearable. But it was also spiritual. Emotional. The mate bond completing itself in waves of sensation that had nothing to do with flesh and everything to do with souls. When Ronan finally marked her, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, Elara felt the bond snap into place with such force that she cried out. Not in pain. In completion. In rightness. The mark burned for a moment, then settled into a pleasant warmth that spread through her entire body. She was his. He was hers. Forever. Ronan collapsed beside her on the bed, pulling her into his arms, both of them breathing hard. Mine, he murmured against her hair. Finally. Completely. Irrevocably mine. Yours, Elara agreed, pressing her lips to the center of his chest. Always. They lay there for a long time, wrapped around each other, letting the bond settle into place. Outside, the sun continued to rise. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days until they'd have to face the High Council and defend their choices. But for now, they had this. This moment of peace. This sense of belonging. This feeling of coming home. What happens now? Elara asked eventually. Ronan's arms tightened around her. Now we fight, he said simply. We go before the High Council, we prove that Marcus was a monster and Jareth was manipulated and our bond is real and sacred. And then we change the world. Change it how? By making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, Ronan said fiercely. By dismantling every system that allows Omegas to be treated as property. By building a pack, a kingdom, where everyone has value. Where everyone has choice. Where no one is invisible. That's a big dream, Elara said softly. It's our dream, Ronan corrected. You and me. Alpha and Luna. Partners in every way. Luna. The title settled over Elara like a crown. Terrifying and beautiful and absolutely right. I don't know how to be a Luna, she admitted. Neither do I, Ronan said with a small smile. But we'll figure it out together. Together, Elara repeated. Always. She believed him. For the first time in her life, she believed that the future might actually be something worth living for. Something worth fighting for. And as they lay there, complete and whole and finally safe, Elara felt something she'd never experienced before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, absolutely undeniable joy. The prophecy had been right. When the Alpha King claimed the silenced Omega, the old hierarchy fell. But something better rose to take its place. Something built on love instead of fear. On choice instead of control. On hope instead of despair. The trials weren't over. There would be challenges ahead, enemies to face, battles to fight. But they would face them together. And that made all the difference. The High Council chamber was a cathedral of power. Carved from white marble and ancient stone, it sat at the peak of the sovereign mountain, neutral territory, sacred ground where no alpha could claim dominance. 12 thrones arranged in a semicircle faced a raised platform where those being judged would stand. 3 days had passed since Ronan and Elara completed their bond. 3 days of preparation, strategy sessions, and gathering evidence. 3 days of wolves across all territories watching to see what would happen to the Alpha King who defied the High Council for his Omega mate. Now, the moment had arrived. Elara stood beside Ronan on the judgment platform, her hand clasped in his, the mate mark on her neck visible to everyone in the chamber. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue that Ronan had commissioned specifically for this hearing, elegant, but not ostentatious, powerful, but not threatening. She looked like a Luna. She felt like a Luna. The 12 High Council members sat on their thrones, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Elder James and Elder Catherine were among them, allies, but only 2 votes out of 12. At the center throne sat the High Counselor herself, a woman named Margaret who looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair braided into a crown and eyes sharp as broken glass. Alpha King Ronan Blackclaw, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the chamber with surprising strength. You stand accused of defying High Council authority, attacking a sovereign pack's territory without just cause, and placing personal attachment above pack welfare. How do you answer these charges? Not guilty, Ronan said clearly. On all counts. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The gallery was packed with witnesses, pack leaders from across the territories, elders from various councils, even common wolves who'd traveled days to see this historic hearing. Bold, Margaret said. Given that we have documentation of every charge. Video evidence of your attack on Ironclaw territory. Testimony from multiple witnesses regarding your defiance of our custody order. She leaned forward. What possible defense could you offer? The truth, Ronan said simply. Margaret's eyebrow arched. Then by all means, Alpha King. Enlighten us. Ronan took a breath. When he spoke, his voice rang with authority, not alpha command, but something deeper. Conviction. 20 years ago, he began. A conspiracy was born. Elder Marcus Graythorn, my own council member, learned of an ancient prophecy that said when an Alpha King claimed a silenced Omega as his mate, the old hierarchy would fall. Marcus saw this as a threat to his power, and he was right. So he took steps to ensure the prophecy would never come true. What steps? Another council member asked, a man named Lincoln with iron gray hair. He found the Omega from the prophecy. My true mate. Ronan's hand tightened on Elara's. And he suppressed our bond using illegal magic, then buried her in the Omega quarters where I would never find her. That's a serious accusation, Margaret said. Can you prove it? We can, Theo said, stepping forward from his position behind them. He carried a metal case, which he opened to reveal 5 suppression collars. These were found hidden in the Blackclaw Omega quarters. Forensic analysis shows they contain Marcus's scent, his DNA, and traces of dark magic that match his magical signature. He handed documentation to one of the council attendants, who distributed it to the 12 thrones. We also have testimony from 32 Omegas, Liam added, moving to stand beside Theo. All of them describe conditions that amount to slavery. Locked doors. Monitored exits. Disappearances of wolves who questioned authority. And all of it overseen by Elder Marcus. These Omegas, another council member said, a woman named Sophia. They're hardly reliable witnesses. They have everything to gain by supporting their Alpha's narrative. Perhaps, Elder Catherine said from her throne. But we also have this. She produced a file and passed it to Margaret. Financial records from the past 15 years, Catherine explained, showing that Marcus embezzled over $2 million from the Black Claw Pack treasury. Money that was supposedly allocated for Omega welfare and instead went into his personal accounts. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Margaret flipped through the file, her expression growing darker with each page. These appear authentic. They are, James confirmed. We verified them through 3 independent auditors. Marcus wasn't just abusing Omegas, he was stealing from his own pack to fund his lifestyle. And the contract? Margaret asked, looking at Ronan. The one Alpha Jareth used to claim custody of your mate? Forged, Ronan said. Elder Catherine and Elder James discovered discrepancies in the seal and dating. The contract was created after Elara's parents died, not before. Marcus fabricated it as a backup plan in case I ever discovered the mate bond. We have Alpha Jareth's testimony to that effect, Catherine added. He's admitted he was manipulated, that he believed the contract was real because Marcus presented it as legitimate. Margaret sat back in her throne, processing the information. So your claim is that Marcus orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy spanning 2 decades, all to prevent a prophecy from coming true? Yes, Ronan said. That sounds rather fantastical. Perhaps, Elara said quietly. Every head in the chamber turned toward her. She'd been silent until now, letting Ronan and his allies present the evidence. But there was something only she could say. Something only she had the right to speak. May I address the council? She asked formally. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You are the Alpha King's mate. You have standing. Speak. Elara took a breath and stepped forward slightly, still holding Ronan's hand but addressing the council directly. High Counselor, esteemed council members, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I understand that this situation appears complicated. That the charges against Alpha Ronan seem straightforward. He defied your authority. He attacked another territory. He prioritized one Omega over pack welfare. She paused. But I ask you to consider what the alternative would have been. The alternative? Lincoln asked. If Ronan had followed your custody order. If he'd let Jareth take me based on a fraudulent contract. If he'd prioritized politics over justice. Elara's voice grew stronger. What message would that have sent to every Omega in every territory? That we're property to be traded on paperwork? That ancient contracts can bind us to futures we never chose? That our bonds, our choices, our very souls matter less than legal convenience? Silence fell across the chamber. For 20 years, Elara continued, I was invisible. I was told I had no value, no voice, no right to exist as anything more than a servant. I was locked in quarters that were really prisons. I watched friends disappear. I had my wrist broken for trying to escape. Her free hand moved unconsciously to the scar. And, through it all, I was taught that this was normal. That this was right. That Omegas were supposed to suffer. Elara, Margaret said gently, no one here condones abuse. Don't you? Elara interrupted, then immediately caught herself. Forgive me, High Counselor. But with respect, yes, you do. By allowing hierarchies that place Omegas at the bottom with no protections. By permitting councils to govern Omega affairs without oversight. By enforcing old laws like the one Jareth invoked without questioning whether those laws are just. She took a breath. Marcus wasn't an aberration. He was a symptom of a system that's been broken for generations. If you're nodding along right now, if you're feeling the power of what Elara is saying, drop a comment with "Speak Truth." Because this is the moment. This is where everything changes. Another council member, a younger woman named Ashley, leaned forward. You're suggesting we're complicit? I'm suggesting that good wolves can participate in bad systems without realizing it, Elara said carefully. That traditions can become oppression when no one questions them. That laws made for one era may not serve another. She looked at Margaret. The prophecy spoke of the old hierarchy falling. Maybe it needs to. Maybe it's time to build something better. Better how? Margaret asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. Equal protections for all wolves, regardless of designation, Ronan said, stepping forward to stand beside Elara. Oversight for council members who govern vulnerable populations. Abolition of any law that allows wolves to be bound to contracts they didn't personally consent to. And recognition that mate bonds, true mate bonds, are sacred and cannot be overridden by paperwork or politics. You're asking us to rewrite centuries of tradition, Sophia said. I'm asking you to choose justice over convenience, Ronan replied. I defied your custody order not because I don't respect your authority, but because that authority was being used to enforce an injustice. Jareth's claim was based on fraud. Elara was being held against her will. And every moment I waited to act was another moment she suffered. His amber eyes blazed. So yes, I attacked Ironclaw territory. I extracted my mate by force. And I would do it again without hesitation, because protecting her was the right thing to do. Even if it meant losing your crown? Margaret asked. Especially if it meant losing my crown, Ronan said fiercely. Because what good is power if I can't use it to protect the wolves who need it most? What good is a throne if I have to compromise my mate to sit on it? He looked at Elara, his expression softening. She is worth more than any crown. Worth more than any kingdom. And if this council can't see that, then you don't deserve to govern wolves at all. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Like a revolution. Margaret sat back in her throne, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable. The other council members exchanged glances, some uncertain, some hostile, some thoughtful. Finally, Margaret spoke. This council will adjourn to deliberate. Alpha King, you and your mate will wait in the antechamber until we reach a decision. She stood, and the other council members rose with her. Court is in recess. They filed out through a door behind the thrones, leaving the chamber buzzing with speculation. Ronan and Elara were escorted to a small room adjacent to the main chamber, comfortable, but clearly meant for waiting, with cushioned chairs and windows overlooking the mountain range. The door closed behind them. They were alone. That was incredible, Theo said, having followed them in with Liam. Elara, the way you spoke to them. It might not be enough, Elara interrupted, moving to stare out the window. Her hands were shaking. They could still rule against us. Then we'll deal with it, Ronan said, coming to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. Whatever happens, we're together. You could lose everything, Elara whispered. Your crown, your pack, your life's work, all because of me. Not because of you, Ronan corrected firmly. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. Because of a system that needed to be challenged. Because of laws that needed to change. You were just the catalyst, the proof that something was fundamentally broken. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. And even if I lose the crown, I'll still have what matters most. I'll have you. Tears burned in Elara's eyes. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know it's vast, I know we barely know each other, but I love you too, Ronan said, cutting her off with a kiss. I've loved you since the moment you made that signal. Since you looked at me with terrified eyes and asked for help anyway. Since you showed me that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. They stood there, foreheads pressed together, drawing strength from each other. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then two. Finally, the door opened. An attendant stood there, her expression carefully neutral. The council has reached a decision. They're ready for you. Ronan took Elara's hand. Together, he murmured. Always, she replied. They walked back into the main chamber. The 12 council members had retaken their thrones. The gallery was packed even more densely than before. Word had spread, and it seemed like every wolf within traveling distance had come to witness this historic moment. Margaret stood as Ronan and Elara took their positions on the judgment platform. Alpha King Ronan Blackclaw, she said formally. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this council has reached a decision regarding the charges against you. The chamber fell deathly silent. On the charge of defying High Council authority, Margaret continued, we find you guilty. Elara's heart plummeted. However, Margaret said, raising a hand to forestall reaction, we acknowledge that the authority you defied was being used to enforce a fraudulent claim. Therefore, while we cannot condone open defiance, we recognize mitigating circumstances. Hope flickered. On the charge of attacking sovereign territory without just cause, Margaret went on, we find you not guilty. The evidence clearly shows that Alpha Jareth was holding your mate based on false documentation. Your extraction of her was legally justified under mate protection laws. Relief flooded through Elara. On the charge of placing personal attachment above pack welfare, Margaret said, we find this charge complicated. The chamber held its breath. You did prioritize your mate, Margaret said slowly. But in doing so, you exposed a conspiracy that had been harming your pack for decades. You brought to light abuses that this council should have caught years ago. You challenged laws that, upon examination, we find to be outdated and unjust. She paused. So while your methods were unorthodox and your defiance problematic, the ultimate outcome was a net positive for wolf society as a whole. Elara squeezed Ronan's hand so hard she thought she might break bones. Therefore, Margaret said, her voice ringing with authority, this council rules as follows. Alpha King Ronan Blackclaw will retain his crown and his authority over Blackclaw territory. However, he will be placed on formal probation for 1 year, during which time his decisions will be subject to High Council review. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Additionally, Margaret continued, this council recognizes the mate bond between Alpha Ronan and Elara as sacred and inviolable. The forged contract is hereby declared null and void, and Alpha Jareth Blackthorn is ordered to cease any and all claims to Elara upon penalty of execution. More murmurs. Finally, Margaret said, and her expression shifted into something that might have been approval, this council acknowledges that the current laws regarding Omega protections are inadequate. We are establishing a committee to review and reform these laws, with input from Omegas themselves, including Luna Elara, should she choose to participate. Luna. They'd recognized her as Luna. Elara's vision blurred with tears. Elder Marcus Greythorn will be tried separately on charges of fraud, embezzlement, abuse of authority, and conspiracy, Margaret finished. Given the evidence, we expect a conviction and lifetime imprisonment. She looked directly at Ronan and Elara. This council stands adjourned. May the bonds you forged lead to a better future for all wolves. She struck her gavel once. The chamber erupted. Wolves cheering, shouting, some celebrating, some protesting. The noise was deafening. But Elara barely heard it. Because Ronan had swept her up into his arms, spinning her around, his face transformed with joy and relief. We won, he breathed against her hair. Gods, Elara, we won. We won, she repeated, laughing and crying at the same time. They'd won. Not just the hearing. Not just the crown. They'd won the right to be together. The right to change things. The right to build something better. As Ronan set her down, Elara looked around the chamber at all the faces, some happy, some uncertain, some hostile. This wasn't over. There would be wolves who resisted the changes, who clung to the old ways, who saw equality as a threat rather than progress. But for the first time, Elara felt equipped to face those challenges. Because she wasn't alone. She had Ronan. She had allies like Theo and Liam and elders James and Catherine. She had a voice that had finally been heard. And she had hope. Real, tangible, undeniable hope. As they left the High Council chamber and stepped out onto the mountain peak, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new dawn was coming, and Elara would be there to see it. Not as an invisible Omega, but as a Luna, as a mate, as a wolf who had found her power and chosen to use it for good. The prophecy had been right. When the Alpha King claimed the silenced Omega, the old hierarchy fell. But something beautiful rose to take its place. Something built on love and justice and the unwavering belief that every wolf, regardless of designation, deserved to be seen, to be heard, to matter. And as Ronan pulled Elara close, pressing a kiss to her temple, she felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was just the beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Alpha King's private chambers, painting everything in warm golden light. Elara stood before the mirror, adjusting the silver circlet that rested on her dark hair. It was simple but elegant, a Luna's crown, officially presented to her 3 months ago during the formal claiming ceremony that had brought wolves from every territory to witness. She still wasn't entirely used to seeing herself like this. Luna Elara Blackclaw, mate to the Alpha King, leader, advocate, voice for the voiceless. You're staring again. Ronan's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe of their bedroom, dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a simple black shirt. No crown, no formal regalia. Just Ronan, her mate, looking at her like she hung the moon. I still can't believe this is real sometimes, Elara admitted. Believe it, Ronan said, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her from behind. He pressed a kiss to her mate mark, now fully healed into a beautiful silvered scar. You've earned every bit of this. Elara leaned back into his warmth, her hands covering his where they rested on her waist. So much had changed in 6 months. The Omega quarters had been completely dismantled. The building had been converted into a community center where wolves of all designations could gather, learn, and access resources. The Omegas who'd been trapped there were now integrated into pack life. Some had chosen to stay with Blackclaw, others had transferred to different territories to be closer to family or pursue new opportunities. All of them were free. Beth, the former Omega supervisor, had been quietly retired. Investigation had revealed she'd been caught between Marcus's cruelty and her own survival instincts. Not innocent, but not entirely guilty either. She'd been reassigned to a position with no authority over vulnerable wolves and required to undergo extensive counseling. Elder Marcus himself was in prison, awaiting trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, if he was lucky. Several wolves were calling for execution. Elara had mixed feelings about that. She wanted justice, not vengeance. But she understood the anger. Understood the need to see consequences for decades of abuse. The reforms were moving slowly but steadily. The committee Margaret had established was working to rewrite Omega protection laws, with input from Omegas across all territories. Elara sat on that committee, along with 5 other Omegas who'd experienced similar abuse in their own packs. It was hard work. Exhausting. Some days she wanted to scream at the resistance they faced from traditionalists who insisted the old ways were fine, that Omegas complaining were just being difficult. But then she'd receive letters from Omegas in other territories, thanking her for speaking up, telling her their lives were already improving because someone had finally said enough. Those letters made it worth it. Are you ready? Ronan asked, pulling her from her thoughts. The delegation arrives in an hour. Right. Today's meeting. Elara took a breath and nodded. Ready. The delegation from Ireclaw territory arrived exactly on time. Alpha Jareth Blackthorn stood in the Great Hall, the same hall where Elara had made her signal 6 months ago, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He'd brought 5 wolves with him, including his beta and head of security. Alpha Jareth, Ronan said formally, inclining his head in greeting. Welcome to Blackclaw territory. Alpha Ronan, Jareth replied, returning the gesture. His storm-gray eyes flicked to Elara. Luna Elara. Alpha Jareth, Elara said carefully. The last time she'd seen him, she'd been his prisoner. The awkwardness of this meeting couldn't be overstated. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Jareth said. I know our history makes this complicated. That's putting it mildly, Liam muttered from his position behind Ronan. Jareth's lips quirked slightly. Fair. He took a breath. I came to apologize. Formally. For what I did. For believing Marcus's lies, for taking Elara, for threatening your pack. His gaze met Ronan's steadily. I was manipulated, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I should have questioned the contract more thoroughly. I should have verified the information independently. I didn't, and that failure nearly cost an innocent woman her freedom and nearly started a war. The apology sounded genuine. Sincere. Ronan studied him for a long moment. Apology accepted, he said finally. With conditions. Which are? Your pack implements the same Omega protections we're establishing here, Ronan said. Full oversight, regular inspections, zero tolerance for abuse. I want to know that what happened in my territory won't happen in yours. Jareth nodded immediately. Already in progress. I've brought documentation for your review. He gestured to his beta, who stepped forward with a folder. We've restructured our entire hierarchy management system. Omegas now have representation on the council, access to education and career opportunities, and legal recourse if they experience discrimination. Theo took the folder and began reviewing it, his expression thoughtful. Additionally, Jareth continued, I wanted to extend an invitation. Ironclaw Territory is hosting a summit next month, pack leaders from across the northern continent, focused on modernizing our governing structures. Given your, shall we say, catalyst role in sparking these reforms, your presence would be valuable. You want us to attend a summit in your territory? Elara asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. I want us to work together, Jareth corrected. Look, I'm not going to pretend we're friends. We're not. But we are both leaders trying to make things better for our packs. And I hope, we can accomplish more as allies than as enemies. Ronan glanced at Elara, a silent question in his eyes. She considered it. 6 months ago, she would have said absolutely not. The idea of returning to Ironclaw territory made her skin crawl. But 6 months ago, she'd been a different person. Weaker. More afraid. Now she was a Luna. And Lunas faced their fears. We'll attend, Elara said. On one condition. Name it, Jareth said. You arrange for me to meet with your Omegas privately. I want to hear from them directly about their experiences, their concerns, their needs. No overseers, no council members listening in. Just honest conversation. Something shifted in Jareth's expression, respect, maybe, or approval. Done, he said. I'll arrange it personally. They worked out the details over the next hour. By the time Jareth's delegation left, a tentative alliance had been formed. Not friendship, but cooperation. A start. As the Ironclaw wolves departed, Ronan pulled Elara aside. You didn't have to agree to go back there, he said quietly. If it's too difficult. It is difficult, Elara interrupted. But that's exactly why I need to go. To show myself and other Omegas watching that we don't let trauma define us. That we can face the places that hurt us and come out stronger. Ronan's expression filled with pride and love. You're extraordinary. You know that? Elara smiled. You might have mentioned it once or twice. I'll keep mentioning it, Ronan promised, pulling her close. Every day for the rest of our lives. 2 weeks later. The reforms were officially announced across all territories. New laws protecting Omega rights. mandatory oversight for council positions, abolition of any contracts binding wolves without their personal consent, recognition that mate bonds superseded all other legal obligations. It wasn't perfect. There were loopholes that still needed closing, resistance from traditionalists that would take years to overcome. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress. And Elara had been part of making it happen. She stood in what had once been the Omega Quarters, now fully converted into the community center, watching wolves of all designations mingle freely. An Omega teaching a class on financial literacy. A Beta learning woodworking from an Omega craftsman. Children playing together regardless of their parents' ranks. This, Elara thought. This is what we were fighting for. There you are. She turned to find Ronan approaching, accompanied by two familiar faces. Charlotte and Maya. The two Omegas who'd disappeared years ago, who Elara had thought were dead. They'd been found 3 months ago, hidden in a facility run by wolves loyal to Marcus. Traumatized, malnourished, but alive. Their recovery had been slow. Painful. But they were here now, standing in the sunshine, smiling. Charlotte. Maya. Elara rushed forward to embrace them. What are you doing here? We wanted to see it, Charlotte said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The center. What you built. What you changed. We wanted to say thank you, Maya added quietly. For not forgetting us. For fighting even when you thought we were gone. Elara's throat tightened with emotion. I could never forget you. You were my friends. My family when I had none. And now? Charlotte asked, glancing at Ronan with a knowing smile. Now you have him. And a whole pack. And your Luna. Elara, you're changing the world. We're changing it, Elara corrected. All of us. Together. They spent the next hour touring the center, laughing and sharing stories and marveling at how far they'd come. When Charlotte and Maya finally left, heading to their new apartments in the redesigned residential wing, Elara felt a sense of completion settle over her. Not ending, but full circle. Happy? Ronan asked, sliding his arm around her waist. Yes, Elara said simply. I really am. 3 months later. The Ireclaw Summit was everything Jareth had promised and more. Pack leaders from 15 territories attended, along with Omegas, Betas, and advocates for reform. They spent 3 days debating policies, sharing best practices, and building alliances. Elara gave a keynote speech on the second day. Standing before hundreds of wolves, many of whom still viewed Omegas as lesser, she told her story. Not to gain sympathy, but to illustrate what happened when systems went unchecked, when power went unquestioned, when voices were silenced. Change is uncomfortable, she said, her voice carrying across the packed conference hall. It challenges our assumptions, disrupts our comfort, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our societies. But discomfort is the price of growth. And growth is the only way forward. She talked about the Omega Quarters. About suppression collars and broken wrists and friends who disappeared. She talked about the signal that had changed everything. And she talked about hope. About the belief that wolves were capable of better if they chose to be. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Not everyone was convinced. She could see the skeptical faces, the crossed arms, the wolves who would leave that summit unchanged. But others were listening. Really listening. And that was enough. 1 year later, Elara stood in the gardens of the Blackclaw estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. So much had changed in a year. The reforms were taking root across territories. Omega advocacy groups had formed in 12 packs. The High Council had officially abolished 3 outdated laws and was reviewing 7 more. Marcus had been convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Elara had attended the trial, had looked him in the eye as the verdict was read. He'd shown no remorse. But he'd also lost. Completely and irrevocably. And that was its own form of justice. The prophecy's warning about 3 trials and 3 enemies had proven true, in a way. The first trial had been the High Council hearing, testing whether their bond could survive political pressure. The second had been the reforms themselves, testing whether they could actually change a system designed to resist change. The third had been more personal. A challenge from a traditionalist alpha who'd tried to invoke old duel laws to reclaim pack honor. Ronan had defeated him in single combat, but the experience had reminded them that progress always faced resistance. As for the three enemies, Marcus had been the first. Jareth had been the second, though he'd transformed from enemy to ally. The third remained nebulous, a threat not yet fully revealed but always lurking in the shadows. The ideology of those who believed hierarchy and oppression were natural, inevitable right. That enemy would take generations to defeat. But they were making progress. "You're thinking too hard again," Ronan's voice interrupted her thoughts. She smiled as he came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Just reflecting," she said, "on everything that's happened. Everything that's changed. Everything that's better," Ronan corrected. "Because of you. Because of us," Elara said. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Neither could I," Ronan murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That's the point of being mates. Being partners. Sharing the burden and the triumph equally." Elara turned in his arms to face him. "I love you," she said. "I know I say it all the time, but—" "Say it as much as you want," Ronan interrupted. "I'll never get tired of hearing it." His amber eyes softened. "I love you too. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They stood there in the fading light, wrapped in each other, content in the knowledge that they'd fought for something that mattered and won. "What happens now?" Elara asked. "Now," Ronan smiled. "Now we keep building. Keep fighting. Keep making this world better for the wolves who come after us." His hand moved to rest on her stomach. "For our future." Elara's breath caught. She'd suspected for a few days now. Had planned to confirm it before telling him. But apparently, the mate bond had other ideas. "You knew?" she whispered. "I suspected," Ronan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your scent changed slightly. Sweeter. And I can hear—" He stopped, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I can hear the heartbeat. Faint, but there." Tears streamed down Elara's face. "We're having a baby. We're having a baby," Ronan repeated, his voice cracking. He dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her stomach. "Gods. Elara. We're going to be parents." She ran her fingers through his dark hair, her own tears falling freely now. "Are you happy?" Ronan looked up at her, and the expression on his face was answer enough. Pure, undiluted joy. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "And overwhelmed. And more happy than I've ever been in my entire life." Elara laughed, the sound bright and free. "Me too." They stayed like that for a long moment, Ronan kneeling before her, Elara's hands in his hair, the sunset painting them both in gold. A year ago, Elara had been invisible. Voiceless. Trapped. Now she was a Luna. A mate. An advocate. A change-maker. And soon, she would be a mother. To a child who would grow up in a world she'd helped reshape. A world where Omegas had rights and voices and choices. Where bonds were sacred and freedom was valued and every wolf mattered. Not perfect, but better. And getting better every day. "Thank you," Ronan said quietly, standing and pulling her close once more. "For what?" "For making that signal. For trusting me. For being brave enough to ask for help when every instinct told you to stay silent." He cupped her face in his hands. "For changing my world. My heart. My entire understanding of what it means to lead." "We changed each other," Elara said. "That's what mates do." Ronan smiled, that genuine, beautiful smile that she'd come to treasure. "Then I'd say we're doing it right." As the last rays of sunset faded into twilight, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elara felt peace settle over her. The kind of peace that came from knowing you'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the ashes. The kind of peace that came from being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly who you were. The kind of peace that came from home. Not a place, but a person. A bond. A future worth fighting for. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The old hierarchy had fallen. And something infinitely better had risen to take its place. A kingdom built on love. On justice. On hope. And as Ronan led her back toward the estate, toward their chambers and their pack and their life together, Elara knew with absolute certainty. This was exactly where she was meant to be. With exactly who she was meant to be with. Living exactly the life she was meant to live. Not invisible. Not silenced. But seen. Finally, completely, beautifully seen. And that made all the difference. Oh my goodness, we did it. We made it to the end of Elara and Ronan's incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in love and justice and the power of speaking up, drop a comment below telling me your favorite moment. Was it the signal? The mate bond reveal? The confrontation with Marcus? The pregnancy announcement? I want to know what resonated with you. And listen, if you loved this story, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This channel is all about bringing you epic, emotional, transformative stories that stay with you long after they're done. Stories about love conquering all, about finding strength you didn't know you had, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. Share this with someone who needs hope today. Share it with someone who loves werewolf romance. Share it with someone who believes that change is possible when we have the courage to speak up. Thank you for going on this journey with me. For spending these hours with Elara and Ronan, for believing in their love, for celebrating their victory. Until next time, remember, you are seen. You matter. And your voice has power. Now go out there and change the world.